Julie Ann Weflin was a 28-year-old from Deer Park, Washington. She worked for the Bonneville Power Administration and loved the outdoors. On September 16, 1987, on her way home, Julie stopped at a substation to make sure it was working correctly. Julie never made it home. She was never seen again. I'm Ed Dentzel, and this is Unfound. Encountering disappointment is a part of life. Nobody goes through life succeeding at everything. Not Michael Jordan, not Warren Buffett, and certainly not Nickelback. So to prosper in life, whatever prosper means to you personally, we must find ways to overcome failure. We must discover ways to recover from expectations that aren't fulfilled. And we must steel ourselves against the prospects of not getting what we want. If we don't, life becomes miserable. We start to see conspiracies at every turn. We can start to believe everyone else is working against us, when really, people have their own desires. And most of the time, your wants and their wants just don't mesh. That's just the way it goes. The world does not revolve around us. It revolves around the sun. Well, in the disappearance of Julie Weflin, and we'll be talking about some other women today, she was part of an outdoors group in the Spokane area, and a man in the club wanted Julie. Being that she was married, Julie turned down his advances. Then Julie was gone. And we're left to determine if hers and these other women's disappearances were committed by the Women's Reject. And now a summary of the case. This is brought to you by my friend Megan Good's website, charleyproject.org. Julie Weflin had her whole life in front of her. At the time of her disappearance, she had been married to Mike, a house painter, and everything was going well. Julie was working for the Bonneville Power Administration, also known as the BPA, going out and repairing electrical lines and remote substations. This allowed her to be around her other passion, nature. Julie loved the trees and mountains and bodies of water that the state of Washington had to offer. She got to work in the outdoors every day. Everything was perfect. Then, on September 16th, 1987, toward the end of the workday, an alert came in that the substation at the corner of Four Mound Road and Cooley Height Road in Spokane County had a problem. Nothing that needed immediate attention, but since it was on the way home, Julie volunteered to check it out on the way. However, Julie never made it home. A call from her husband to the BPA that evening caused a search to start for Julie. The first place people looked was the substation. They ended up finding Julie's vehicle, doors open with tools and her helmet strewn over the ground. Canvassing of the area yielded no additional clues. She was never seen again. There was no movement in Julie's disappearance until 2011. 24 years later, when a former co-worker of hers put together a team to figure out what happened. Over the last 9 years, they have established substantial circumstantial evidence pointing at one man in particular. You will hear about that person of interest today. In addition, though, you, the listeners, will for the first time hear about two other missing women from the same area. Deborah Swanson, who disappeared in 1986, and Kathryn Gregory in 1981. This team has put together evidence, once again circumstantial, that this person of interest in Julie's disappearance could be responsible for theirs as well. When we are done today, you'll have to ask yourself these questions. Number 1, what are the odds that a man would know 2 missing women who seemingly didn't know each other? Number 2, how are we to square the idea that one man could be responsible for 3 disappearances when all 3 are very much different in their structure? And number 3, now that the person of interest is deceased, what can be further done to prove or disprove he is the perpetrator of these crimes? Julie's and Deborah's families are somewhat convinced the person of interest is the actual correct suspect in these women's disappearances. Kathryn's relatives have not been contacted, so their beliefs are unknown. The guest for this episode is Julie Weflin's friend and former co-worker, John Polos. Unfound news. I've been talking about it for at least a month now, and it's finally here this Sunday, May 24th at 8 p.m. Eastern, right after the Think Tank. This is another program that will be for premium Patreon members. However, we may work out something where everyone else has access to the new program after the fact. Dr. Eric Grabowski will be the host. What's it called? Unfound on the Ground. It will broadcast through Zoom. The basis for this new program is education. The goal is to help the audience become better advocates, researchers, and investigators. Cases will be used to further the theme for that episode. The theme for the first presentation, raising awareness of missing persons, mindsets, and methods. It may be a limited series. It may exist for 50 years. We're just not sure right now. But I encourage you to join Patreon if this and all the other things Unfound offers on Patreon sound interesting and engaging to you. Patreon.com/Unfound Podcast. Next, we have begun the process of moving Unfound t-shirt production over to my assistant, Heather. She already has her own private business in which she makes door hangers, signs, shirts, and other items. Please check out her Facebook page, Heather Aylett Design. That's Aylettee, Heather Aylett Design. And her website, heather-aylett-design.myshopify.com. I'm very happy to bring one more thing, like with Natasha and the website, back under Unfound control. Finally, the remains found on Dennis Bowman's property in Michigan have been positively identified as his adopted daughter, Andrea Bowman. He has been charged with her murder, and that is on top of the murder charge he is already facing in Virginia. We at Unfound continue to believe Dennis Bowman is a serial killer and killed multiple women and children. And we believe in the coming years, their deaths will also be pinned on him. Where you can find Unfound. Unfound supports accounts on Podomatic, iTunes, Stitcher, Instagram, Twitter, Spotify, Deezer, and Facebook. On Wednesday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern, please join us on the Unfound Podcast Channel on YouTube for the Unfound Live Show. All of you can talk with me, and I can answer your questions. And for Patreon this week, I need to thank Kristen and Tanya. I'm so happy to have on this episode of Unfound a former co-worker and friend of Julie Weflin, John Polos. John, welcome to Unfound.
Thank you.
John, it's been a while. We've been on each other for a while. I think we first talked in 2017, early 2017, about Julie, and it's finally great to have you on the program. So why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about yourself?
Well, thanks a lot, Ed. I appreciate what you do. I want you to know that. I met Julie. I'm a retired engineer from the Bonneville Power Administration. I live in Battleground, Washington, and my background is I now teach school. I'm 77. I teach math in a local school, but I was a reserve deputy sheriff for 2 years, and I have 17 years. I'm still in search and rescue. And my engineering background gave me a little bit of ability to listen to people and put facts together. And in 2010, I'd been thinking about Julie, and I was involved in a missing person case. The person that's missing for 10 years, 20 years in Clark County. We went out, we looked at the evidence, and I figured out the case and solved it. I can't give out the name because the family's still around, but it's in the Reflector newspaper. Anyway, I solved the missing person case, and that got me thinking, what about if I solved one, why couldn't somebody solve another one if you just dig into it? And that was my idea that I decided to go ahead and start digging into it in late 2010.
For Julie.
For Julie,
okay.
Right.
So you do have some law enforcement experience.
Yes.
Correct? Okay. And you...
Yes.
Okay. And what was exactly, at the time of Julie's disappearance in 1987, you worked for the BPA as well. What was your exact position, and how did that relate to what Julie was doing at the time at the same company?
Well, right. I was in our control center in Vancouver, and I was a lead senior engineer in operations planning and power scheduling and streamflow forecasting. And Julie worked next door to us, the next building over. She just got transferred over from Portland, and she was working in our safety office. So this was early 1980s. So we all eat in the same cafeteria. We all know each other. So we got several of us got to talking to Julie. We said, "Oh, why don't you get into the substation operator apprenticeship? It's a wonderful career." So we talked her into it and helped her get the paperwork going, and she got accepted. She was one of the first female Bonneville Power substation operators, and so that's how I met her, early 1980s.
Wow. So you knew her for at least 5 years before she disappeared.
Yes.
Wow, okay. And this is called the BPA, Bonneville Power Authority?
Administration.
Administration.
Bonneville Power Administration. It's like the Tennessee Valley Authority or Con Edison or Pacific Gas and Electric. It's the major high voltage utility for geographical area. Parts of the United States, it's a federal entity, as TVA and BPA is. Other parts of the country, it's a private utility like Con Ed. But there's only one high voltage company in an area. You don't duplicate.
Okay, and that's the company that you worked for and you were working for at the time. And maybe once again, just to give the listeners an idea, at the time of Julie's disappearance in 1987, how long had you worked there? About?
15 years.
15 years. Okay, thank you. All right. So, but at the same...
more like almost 20 years.
Almost 20 years. Okay.
19, yeah.
Okay, so am I then to understand while you were working at BPA that you also were a reserve deputy at the same time, or was that after?
Yeah, that during it was 83 to 85. I was a reserve deputy for 2 years, and then in 2003 I came back into it as in search and rescue. I've been in search and rescue since then.
All right, great. All right, thank you. All right, you already we've talked, of course, about how you met Julie early 80s. You told her that she should apply for a job at the BPA. So would you say that you were like her supervisor at the time, or were you in two totally different sections of the company, or what?
No, I was just co-working in another building. I was not her supervisor.
Okay.
But we all knew each other. We all know each other there, so we were all just trying to help her.
Okay. And of course, as we know, things have changed since the 70s and 80s, but at the time, was she one of the few women doing the job that she was doing?
I'm not positive, but I think she was our first female substation operator. And there were several more after that. And there's quite a few now, I'm sure.
Okay. And I do know that she was married, although I don't think we're going to get into her husband's name at the time, but he was married, and we should state for the record that he has totally been ruled out as being a suspect. He was like 50 miles away when she disappeared. But did you did you ever meet her husband? Do you remember him? Or?
I never did, but he was quite active for about 7 years trying to find Julie. And then he finally just gave up and backed off and went on with his life.
Right. Okay. And she did not have any children. That's my understanding.
No.
No kids.
No.
No children. Okay.
No.
So,
Yes,
all right. So she's working in a different division, different building than you are, but you know her, like you said, from maybe the cafeteria. In fact, you were one of the people that suggested she get the job that she had at the time of her disappearance. What maybe just personally, just personality, what do you remember about her? How would you portray her, what you think back 30-some years now?
Well, she was a nice, quiet, thoughtful girl. At the time, she would have been about late 20s, or mid 20s, not mid 20s, because she was a graduate of Grant High School class of '77 in Portland.
Okay.
So this is about 5 years later. So she'd be 22, 23. She would have been about 28 when she got abducted.
Right.
It was 10 years after she graduated from high school.
Right.
Really thoughtful, quiet girl, and nice person, and smart. So we thought, substation operator is a great career, and it's a lot of electrical training.
Okay. What is that job? I think this is, once again, I think this is something that the listeners really need to understand about her job. My perception, I've never worked for a power company or anything. The closest I've gotten was I worked for the Department of Transportation in Pennsylvania during my summers in college. But what would her job necessarily entail? Was it something where they worked in teams, or were people in her position working alone a lot? What would you say?
Alone, but she goes through 3 years of training as electrical and working at substations, learning how to flip switches and read meters and understanding how the power system works. And one of the things we do for our sub-operator trainees is they have to spend 1 year on the east side of the Cascades and 1 year on the west side minimum, so they know both sides. And she was over on the east side of the Cascades out of Spokane, so she'd already worked west side. And then once they graduate out of the program, then they're assigned wherever, and then usually go out to a substation by themselves.
Okay.
To work and do switching and maintenance, and then throw breakers and stuff when the dispatchers are going to work on a line. She's there to check to make sure the breakers get tripped and the disconnects.
So would you say that a person in her position spends a lot of time by himself or herself doing this job?
Yes.
Okay. I'm guessing these people, that we have to remember, this is the 1980s, so cell phones, we had the analog ones, but I'm guessing the power company just had walkie-talkies, radios.
Well, they had a two-way radio, and some of the substations have communications, and some of the vehicles had a two-way radio because they're being dispatched out to emergencies. And they're electrical workers just like an electrician, and they get licensed as an electrical worker.
Okay.
And so they had radios, and they log into substations and report where they're at,
Okay. All right. So that was part of the
procedures now.
Please.
Yeah. The procedures now changed after this happened. Now they can't just go out to a substation. They got to look around, make sure nobody's there. Then they open the gate, pull in, lock the gate behind them, and call in. And they don't do anything. If somebody's milling around outside the substation while they're working, they don't go out until they report it. But
okay,
at the time, nobody thought about this.
All right, that's interesting. Yeah, that's interesting. I certainly want to come back to that. I think that's an interesting part of all of this. Okay. I should ask this, being that they do work by themselves. I don't know what the laws were in Washington at the time. I don't even know what they are now. But do you believe that any employees carried weapons because they worked alone by themselves? Even maybe sometimes they even have to go out in the middle of the night. Something happens. There's a power outage. Do you know if any employees who would carry weapons or anything because of working by themselves? Sometimes in some remote areas.
Right. That's a great question, and I've got a great answer for you. We're not allowed to carry weapons unless we're law enforcement in a government vehicle, but I'm sure people did. Now, one thing, I talked to some female employees at Bonneville Power a few years back, and they said, well, I go out and I do real estate, but I can't carry a gun. I said, wait a minute. She says, if I use my own car, then I can. So people have thought about it, and I don't know, I can't prove that anybody right now is carrying a weapon when they're out of work. We never did.
Okay.
But I've heard people say that I'm going to drive my own car so I can take a weapon with me because I'm out at a remote site seeing different houses.
Right. But the law is if you're in a government vehicle like Julie would have been in that day, it's illegal to do that.
That's not a crime. It's a federal rule, a gun can work rule.
Okay.
It's legal. She could have if she had a concealed carry permit, She could, in the state of Washington, she could legally carry that weapon with her. You just can't enter a tavern or a couple other post office, a couple other businesses.
Right.
As a state law, most criminal laws are state, and that would let her do that, but federal regulations wouldn't.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, thank you for explaining
I'm
that.
sure she was unarmed.
Okay, you're pretty sure. I just wanted to see. I guess what I'm trying to get the idea is, how quote unquote dangerous is this job? Once again, thinking that people are out there probably by themselves, going out to remote areas. Of course, they have tools, they have equipment. We all know about how there's, I remember when I lived in Las Vegas, it seems like copper was being stolen out of light poles and everything all the time. Maybe that was something that, your employees would run into once in a while in Washington in the 1980s. So this is what I'm trying to set this up just to get an idea of the environment for that job.
Yeah, we do have a little bit of copper theft, and a big case was maybe 15, 20 years ago. Maybe I was still working. Somebody went to a local Bonneville Power Substation and was going to steal copper, and they got electrocuted doing it.
Wow.
I don't know there's 500,000 volts on some things. There's some things that look to be safe, but even the grounding rods and stuff, if you pull the lead off a grounding rod, hold on to the lead, you're going to get electrocuted, even though it's a grounding rod. So there's danger there. We've only lost a couple of employees over the years due to work accidents. We've lost a few. Julie's the one and only person that's missing and was abducted that we know of in Bonneville Power's history since 1937 when we were formed.
Okay. That's what makes this a very unique set of circumstances. But on that topic, before Julie's disappearance, once again, your memory, any employees doing the type of her job go out, ever get attacked, anything like that? I realize no disappearances, but ever anything where one of your employees, had a run-in with somebody, anything like that?
A real rare, but normally it'd be a right-of-way person is going out and looking at properties that might be considered for a power line, and somebody get irate and assault them, but it's real rare. It's happened, but I don't remember the exact details.
Okay.
Not anything we expect with our 3,500 employees and 1,000 subcontractors. And
okay. Okay. So you would say, even though these people that do this job, spending a lot of time on their own, it's relatively a safe job.
Yeah, because you're well trained and you have the right proper safety equipment. You're well prepared. Bonneville Power prepares us well, and they train us well. Okay,
very good. I don't know if you knew her well enough to answer this, but I do have to ask this. At the time of her disappearance, do you remember, the last time you saw her or talked to her before she disappeared?
Yes, I do. I remember that was after she got accepted, before she reported. Oh, hey, Julie. And her name at that time was Weflin, so I didn't know it, but she was married to her husband, Mike Weflin, but I didn't know him, and he was a house painter, but I saw her there. Okay, well, great, you're shipping out. Hey, good, we'll see you. And I never heard from her again for a couple of 3 years, but we knew she was around the system. People would tell us, hey, she's over there now. And we knew she had gone over to the east side to Bell Sub out of Spokane. And but the last time I saw her was at Bonneville Power's office at Ross Substation, Vancouver, about 85, probably 85, I don't know, 84.
Okay, so it was a couple years. So you didn't know what was going on in her life necessarily because you weren't working with her, but you did know her, from years before. But you hadn't spoken to her in a couple years.
No, I had not.
Okay, great. All right, let's move up to, let me ask you this. Once you found out, you heard, and we'll get to that day, we're going to actually do that next, but once you heard that she disappeared, did you ever hear of anybody saying that she was having any problems with people who knew her, who were working with her every day? Did she ever complain about anybody?
Not at that time.
No?
Not at that time, but later investigating it, we dug up a lot. But at that time, we didn't know anything,
Okay, so in 1987, in September, October, November, December 1987, you, once again, just being an employee at the time, I realize you became an investigator years later, but at the time as an employee, nobody ever got back to you through the grapevine saying, well, she did say she had this problem, nothing like that at the time.
Not at that time. And remember, everything hinged on September 16th, 1987. She disappeared. Everything changed after that.
Right. But she, once again, there was never anything where she went out to a job and came back and said, I think some guy was following me today or anything.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't know that anyway, but her supervisors at Bell Sub would know that.
Okay.
And they did tell me stuff that happened after we started investigating.
Okay, but that wasn't until
but not at the time.
Once again, you started hearing about this in 2010.
No, I started thinking about the case. Hey, I just solved the case here in 2010 in Clark County. I'm going to look into the Weflin case. I believe there's always evidence out there that's never been uncovered.
Okay.
People see things and don't know they saw it.
Right.
So I've always believed that, and that was the key to solving the case, getting it solved.
But it wasn't until 2010 that you started going back over things that you started to hear, well, she was talking about something that could have led to her disappearance.
Yeah, just other people, third parties.
Right, third parties.
I want to say that it wasn't until 2011 I formed a team of, and we've had people come and go. We've had about 12 to 15 people on the team. 3 or 4 of them didn't want their names released, and I haven't heard back from them. I'd like to thank the people that gave me permission that joined my team. I don't know when that's appropriate to do. We can
certainly do that at the end. We can do that before we complete this. No problem. All right, so let's.
It's been a team effort.
I'm sure it has, and I know that. And I've seen your list. I've seen your list of people. In fact, I've talked to a couple of them, way back when you gave me their numbers. All right, let's move up to September 16th, 1987. We've already gone, I think, through what your responsibility was at BPA, but of course, you did not see
September
16th, 1987.
Yeah, right.
And of course, you were not there that day. You had not seen Julie in a couple years, but of course, we already established you knew her, and you kind of suggested she get the job that she had. What have you learned about that day, what Julie did, where she was going, what was her work schedule? What have you learned?
Well, she was working out of a major substation called Bell Sub with like 500 employees, and she was at that substation working there, and it was in the afternoon. I don't know whether it was 2:30, somewhere around that time. They got an alarm of low nitrogen or something to that effect at Spring Hill Substation, which is west of Spokane, and it's not her duty assignment. She only had another hour to work, but she says, I live out in Deer Park, and I can go home that way and check the substation. So, okay, so she wasn't assigned out there. She volunteered to go out there and check the substation on her way home, and that's, in fact, what she did. So by the time she disappeared, there weren't very many people at Bell Sub, and nobody was looking for her. It wasn't until later, I don't know when that was, later that evening when her husband called in or something, that they knew she was missing. But she was going to go to the substation, fix it, and then go home.
Okay, so let me just go, once again, that's very good. Let me just go through this for the listeners. So what you're saying is there was, like you said, a warning, and Julie was going to go check this substation out, even though it wasn't part of her regular detail?
Correct.
Okay, and it was on her, did you say it was on her way home, the substation?
Right.
Okay.
Correct. She'd go west to the substation and then go north to Deer Park where she lived.
Okay.
But it was...
how far would you say the substation was from where she lived? Do you know?
Probably 20 miles. 20 miles, and the substation's probably 25 miles from Bell Sub, the main headquarters of Bonneville, in that area.
Okay. And the listeners should know, by the time you're hearing our voice for this interview for the episode, I will have created some maps, and I know John has made some excellent maps as well that I will be using to make my own maps, but John surely gets the credit for them. We'll get the credit for him because he's back in 2017, he sent me some very good diagrams, so all of you can really understand what we're saying here, because I know maps are tough to describe in just audio. Okay, so is this a situation, John, where BPA employees drove their vehicles home, so she'd be driving a company vehicle home that day?
I think she had a company vehicle, but it might not have been, because she would drive her vehicle to work and pick up a company vehicle to go out to sites for a day or two or however long. So she may have had her vehicle, and of course she would have taken her vehicle home. I know it was a van, and my thinking is it was her vehicle and not a government vehicle, so she didn't have a radio in it.
Okay, so you're saying that when this happened at this substation, that was her vehicle that was on there and not a BPA vehicle.
I'm 90% sure.
Okay.
I'm not absolutely sure.
Okay. So she says there's this warning. Would you say the type of warning is common?
Yeah, it comes in. We get alarms all the time. We've got over 500 substations, and most of them are unmanned. So we'll get an alarm, current overload, voltage overload, breaker tripped, low nitrogen in the insulation system, or hundreds of different alarms. And they go into what's called our SCADA system, which is supervisory control and data acquisition system, which is a manned site that gets all these alarms. And then they'll call the substation and say, hey, nothing to worry about, or you ought to send an operator out there to that substation.
Okay. So what you're saying is, John, is that Julie, there was no plan that she had to go to the substation, which the intersection is Foremound and Coley Height Road, correct?
Cooley Height Road.
Cooley Height Road.
It's a Y intersection.
Right. Okay. I knew I was going to get that wrong. So there's a substation there, Foremound and Cooley Height Road. I'm sure most listeners have seen what one of these places looks like, and I'm guessing it's surrounded by like a fence and a barbed wire fence or something like that.
Yes, it's got a chain link fence and locked, and
Okay.
and it's in an open area as you drive down. It's a feeder road, and I'll tell you that later on in the story. But there's about a car a minute that goes by it. It's clearly in the open. You can see everything about the substation, and we'll get to that later.
Yeah, yes, we will.
It's not hidden, and it's not a real remote road. It's an access road to an area, so there's about a car a minute going by.
Okay, so she goes out there. She's kind of, I don't know if we're saying taking one for the team, but she says, don't worry about it. I'm headed that way. I'll take a look at it. She's in her private vehicle. Maybe she puts some of her tools in her own vehicle and says, don't worry, I'll hit it on the way home. And what time do you think that she would have arrived at the substation?
I'm guessing 2:30, but based on the fact that somebody saw her there at 3:30, and she disappeared right after that.
Okay, so
it might have been 2:30 or 3 o'clock. She would have arrived at the substation.
Okay, so 2:30 to 3 o'clock, somewhere in there is when she got there, and we'll talk about this witness later. So she's there, and and you've kind of already said this, but we'll go over it again. When did somebody realize that, maybe something wasn't right?
Well, by the time she was abducted, most people would have gone home for the day, and I'm not sure if her husband Mike called into Bonneville asking, or they said, hey, she's never called in from the sub and cleared out of there, So somebody at Bonneville most likely called the sheriff's office, and they sent a deputy out there. I personally talked to the deputy that responded out there. He doesn't want his name released.
Okay.
But he's given us a lot. He's long retired.
Okay.
So somebody called it in. They went out that evening and found her car there, stuff strewn around, and signs of a struggle, and obviously something had happened. But it wasn't until after hours they discovered that.
Okay, so if we're to believe she got there 2:30, somebody allegedly saw her there at 3:30. We'll just, once again, we'll talk about that a little later. So sometime after that, something happens, and then this deputy goes out there, sometime in the evening. We have to remember this is September. Maybe sunset's like 7:30 or maybe even earlier than that.
That time it'd be about 7:30, 8 o'clock. It would start to get dark.
Okay, so maybe hopefully the sheriff gets out, the deputy gets out there before it gets dark, and he sees the car, and he said that it looked like a struggle. Can you maybe elaborate on that a little bit more?
Well, right. First of all, she had already finished her work because we looked at the logbooks, and she was getting ready to leave, and she had opened the locked gate, and so you pull up as a deputy, and you see an unlocked substation. That's a no-no.
Yeah.
And there's the car. The doors are open. Tools and a work hat, a hard hat, and all this stuff is strewn all over the ground. And there's nobody at the substation. And it's obviously the car of an employee because they got BPA logo on their hat, their helmet, and they've got all the tools. And there's no one there. So it's a red flag. You don't leave a substation unlocked.
Right. Okay. So, yeah, that would be a very bad sign. And you had already stated earlier, that we'll touch upon that now, is that that was the standard operating procedure back in 1987, but you're saying in the 21st century it's changed where they totally pull inside and lock the gate behind them?
Yeah, I've heard that. I haven't never actually had it officially. I'm certain that's what's happening now. They don't get out if there's people there, and they call it in on their radio, and they say, "Hey, I've got two guys milling around in front of the substation. I'm not getting out."
Right.
That kind of stuff goes on now, but nobody thought about it back then.
Okay. I guess what I'm saying is you found the right. So if something's going on, they lock the gate, and like you're saying, the gate's open or cars parked there. Just maybe a little bit different between 1987 and 2020. Okay. So
Right.
does the deputy look around or anything, or does he call it right in? What is your understanding of what happens after that?
I don't know what he did. I don't know, but I'm sure. I know the guy. I'm sure he looked around, determined immediately there was a problem, and immediately called back to dispatch and said, "Hey, this substation's unlocked. There's signs of a struggle. There's something going on." He would have called it in right away.
Okay. So he shows up. She's not there. Things strewn around. Her helmet that she would be wearing, just probably because that's one of the rules I know from my PennDOT days, wearing it anytime you're on the job. And that's around, her tools are around, looks like a struggle. The way you understand it, what did they do with the car? Did they tow it out? Did they do any forensics on it? Anything?
I don't know. I do not know. And I know they talked about they couldn't find. At that time there was nobody heard of DNA, and they said they hadn't found any fingerprints. And they allegedly, I'm sure they printed stuff, but I don't know. I can only be guessing. I don't know what they did with the car. I'm sure they checked it.
Okay. So we have to remember. So they'd go out and do this, and once again, you were not working there. You were working for the company, but it's a totally different area. And you didn't start working on this personally until 23 years later. But so what is your understanding then for the next few days about did they talk to her husband? Did they anything substantial, or what did they think? Obviously something happened. It looked like there was a fight or something, but that was about it.
Right. We have no way of knowing. We didn't hear about the disappearance until the next working day, and it just sent shockwaves. But we have no way of knowing what's going on in Spokane. It's quite a ways away from Vancouver, Portland.
Right.
It's a 6-hour drive.
Right.
We have no idea what's going on. We just heard Julie disappeared.
Okay.
And we're all really upset.
I bet you were. And so let's talk about that. When the people in your department in Vancouver, Washington, of course there's a Vancouver, Canada as well, but this is Vancouver, Washington,
yes,
found out about this, what was everybody's reaction? What did you people talk amongst yourselves? I'm guessing there was more than just you who knew Julie. What did everybody have to say?
Yeah, everybody was devastated, and a lot of her female friends were over in the headquarters BPA building in Portland, so I'm sure they talked about it. It was our only topic at coffee. What happened to Julie? What have they found? Have you heard anything? That kind of stuff. But a lot of her female friends at Bonneville worked over at the main building, and they helped me. They helped out on the case too. Okay.
And once again, you were just a regular employee. You were not an investigator yet. At that time in 1987, did management or anybody keep employees abreast of anything that was being done in the investigation of Julie's disappearance, or was this kind of a situation where a month later nobody was talking about it?
No, they kept bulletins out. We get bulletins on it. And then it also came out in the employee-ran employee newsletter. And then BPA offered a reward. And BPA has their own security division. And by the way, the head of the security division is a retired Army colonel. And he's my deputy head in my investigating team. So anyway, they were working on it night and day. And they, of course, can't tell you what they're doing. But no, BPA kept us abreast with bulletins. And then they came out with a reward for any information.
Okay. So at that time, in 1987, once again, 87 into 88, any suspects at all? Did anybody say, well, maybe her of course you didn't know what was going on with the police, but maybe her husband did it? Did she have some other guy on the side? Any suspects, names or otherwise, come up during those those first few months after she disappeared?
I would have no way of knowing, but I developed my suspect list during and after 2011.
Right. Okay.
But I have no idea. They wouldn't tell us. They wouldn't typically brief us about the case. That's confidential.
Okay.
So there's no way we would know.
Okay. So this newsletter, employees kind of kept this going, but I'm guessing at some point people did move on. There wasn't really much to talk about. Here she's missing. Of course, in 1987, there's no DNA. Maybe they got some fingerprints or something, but you, at least at the time, don't know anything about that. The police aren't going to say anything. There's no cell phone records because there were no cell phones. And people kind of eventually, I guess, just went on with their lives.
I understand later, after I investigated in 2011, a whole bunch of people, like 100 people, got together, and for a few days, they searched every day in the area of the substation.
Okay.
Then it got to where they would search on weekends, and pretty soon it died out after a year.
Yeah.
And this is in addition to whatever the sheriff's doing.
Right.
Back then, now searches are all ran by law enforcement. Everybody has to be certified. You just can't go out there as a yahoo and say, hey, I've got to look around here. No, you're not. You have to be trained. Mm-hmm. We go through 2 years of training before we're certified to be field operators. Okay. So now it's different, but at the time, all our friends got together, and the sheriff said, oh, yeah, I don't know that. I can't say that, but people were searching without authority to search.
All around that substation area.
Right.
All right. And once again, for the listeners, that would be the Y intersection at Foremound and Cooley Height Road. And once again,
correct.
At this point, you will be able to find maps on YouTube, on Facebook, and on Instagram. I will put those out there.
Yeah, it's kind of a not a major road, but it's not a minor. It's a paved road that gets a lot of traffic for people going home that way, And like I say, if a car, I'll explain why I know a car a minute was going by the substation.
Being that substation, being that you've been there now, of course, several times, what's the closest house to where that substation is? How far away?
Right next to it, there's a driveway on the east side of the substation that goes up to a guy's house. There's other houses. There's 2 or 3 or 4 houses that could see the substation. It's right in a flat level area, and then down the road back towards Spokane, about a half a mile on the opposite side of the road, is like youth camp. There was nobody at it, but there was buildings that you could see from the substation. In some places you could see a mile or two. It's like a thin pine forest and flat ground. And if you look at pictures of the sub, you can see quite a ways.
Okay. Would you say the closest house was 500 feet away, 1,000 feet away? What would you say?
Certainly 1,000 or less.
All right, so less than a quarter mile.
Different directions.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if she got abducted by somebody was taking a chance that somebody might actually witness it. I guess we could say it that way. This wasn't out in the middle of nowhere. There were houses right there. Okay. Her husband, like we've already talked about, was investigated. They determined that he was 50 miles away on a job, and so he was ruled out. And he wouldn't even know. He would not even know she was there. 5 minutes before she left, nobody in the world knew she was going out to that substation. Okay, right.
And then her supervisor knew it.
Right, because this was kind of.
I'll go stop by.
Right, because this was a kind of a last minute thing. Okay. All right.
Yep.
So this happens. You continue to work at the BPA. Things kind of quiet back down, I guess you could say. It doesn't seem, at least from a public standpoint, that there's a lot going on under disappearance. Not a lot of new information out there, as happens in many, many disappearances all over the United States and the few that we cover in Canada. Let's move up to 2010. You've already stated that you worked on a disappearance in which you solved it, which is fantastic. But you're not going to get into any names, which I totally understand What brought you?
I can tell you about it. I can tell you how I solved it. If that's it.
Well, we're not. I don't know if we want to get into. Certainly might be interesting for another time. But we'll just say that you worked on this other disappearance and was very successful with that. When did you retire from the BPA?
94 with 30 years service, and then I did other careers. I had a couple careers since then.
Right, and you said that you're still teaching.
Full-time.
Yeah, and you said you're still teaching school at 77. That's great, John.
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Teach math and science.
Okay, great. All right, so we move up to 2010, and there was this other disappearance, and you decided to get involved with Julie's. Was that an easy decision to make, or had this been something that you were thinking about for a long time? How would you explain it?
Well, I said, boy, that was, I solved the case in a day, and I said, boy, that was easy to solve if you just look at the facts and put things together and think logically and use engineering and physics. I solved it with engineering and physics. I found that's how I solved that case, and I thought, this isn't rocket science. I've been trained in investigative techniques at the sheriff's office for 2 years, good training, and I said, I just think there's more out there to this. I think we can do some more. So in 2011, I actually formed my first team, and 2 of us went up to Spokane to investigate for 3 days.
All right, these people on your team, did they think you were crazy, or are they eager to help? How would you portray their attitudes at this point?
Oh, yeah, they all think I'm crazy. Not at this time, there was only one other person, but and he was a friend of mine from search and rescue. He's now off in the Navy, serving and doing well. But he had thought about it, too, because he had been a law enforcement explorer, and I said, no way am I going to go up and nose around someplace by myself. So I always wanted somebody with me just for safety and just for backup as to what did somebody say. Well, that isn't true. So this guy went with me. He was 21. So we went up there for 3 days in the spring of 2011.
All right. Well,
and we got permission from
Yeah, let's talk about that. What'd you do when you went up there?
Well, first off, we got our ducks in a row, and I'd called the new owner of Spring Hill Sub. It was a Bonneville Power Sub. It was now owned by Inland Power. I called them up, told them what I was doing, and I said, do we have your permission to be on the site? They said, absolutely. Go up there and look. So we drove up there, and the first thing we did is we drove out to the site. We videoed it. It was still interesting going out there, rural farmland, a few trees. And we got out to the substation. We were amazed that it's right in plain sight. So we had brought our camping gear. We actually camped overnight at the substation, and we counted cars going by the substation, and that's where I came up with. There was about a car a minute going by when we were there. Of course, 20 years earlier, there wouldn't have been quite as much development, so it might have been a car every minute and a half. And that clicked with me. I said, this is not totally isolated. I said, they have no witness to anything. I said, somebody saw something. And that turned out to be true. I came up with, by the time this was 10 years had gone, I had 6 people that saw things. And the way we developed that is we passed out 100 flyers within a 5-mile radius of the substation the same day we camped at it. And we got back to date, I've gotten 58 tips called to me.
Wow. Okay.
Based on
I want to go through. That's a first. That's the first I can think of somebody going about it the way you did it. You actually went door to door. Of course, flyers maybe are not uncommon, but you actually had them, some sort of questionnaire or something.
We had a flyer we made up, and it was based on the BPA flyer, and we had a reward offer, and I had my phone number on it, and as well as I believe we had the tip line too. But I got a lot of calls. I got people that called me that said they wouldn't call the sheriff's office. They wanted to talk to a person that wasn't with it. And that's none of my business, but I had a lot of people call me and said, you're the first person I've talked to.
Okay.
So we got
how far did, if I can ask you, so how many flyers to how many different houses, and how far did you go in each direction? 1 mile, 2 miles, what would you say?
Well, we printed 100 flyers, and we went 2 to 3 miles in each direction all the way around the substation, even to the north of it, which you have to go a loop up another road. We passed flyers out. So we passed 100 flyers out, and we got back 15, 20 tips within the first few days.
Okay.
We were up there 3 days, but
please.
And then we'd already prearranged. we told KREM Channel 2 television that we're going to be up there at the substation. And that second day, we camped out overnight. They sent a crew up there and videoed us at the substation, and we showed them that we had found something. We actually did a search. We went up the hill because by then we'd gotten a couple of tips in that said, oh, there's a cabin up above the substation. Maybe somebody took her there, blah, blah, blah. So we went up there and we found a bone. It turned out to be a deer bone, and it was not part of the case, but we videoed it on TV to get effect, and this video interview is still coming back, and that's where I got my big break in the case 2 years ago with somebody that saw a rerun of it. So they videoed us, interviewed us, and it was on KREM Channel 2 News that night or the next day. And that's been a boost to getting tips in.
Sure.
That plus the flyers.
Sure. Let's talk about the tips that you got. You, of course, sent me, and the listeners should know, I've had John sent me a packet. I looked at the date of the packet on the mailing. I still have the actual envelope with all the information in it. You sent that to me in July of 2017, but I know that we had been talking well before you sent me that package. But in that package, you had actually, diagrammed the tips, number one, number two, number three, and I don't know if we want to get into it to that extent, but what would you say were the overall feeling statements in the tips that you got, at least those first ones?
Well, without going into suspect names, and by the way, I developed a list of 17 suspects for the first 3 years. Surprisingly, I had never heard of anybody as a suspect when I went up there, and before the 3 days were up, we had one suspect that got more hits than maybe half a dozen people told me, well, this guy did it. This guy, I'm not going to say who yet. And we think he did it. He lives up there around the corner from the substation, blah, blah, blah. So he became a person of interest right away. And things developed from there. But all of a sudden I said, this is too much out in the open. She was there for too long. Somebody had to see her. And as it turned out, 6 people have given me tips that they saw her there or saw the abduction take place. And some of the tips are, the most important tip only came in last year, the summer of 2018. So I always felt that somebody saw something but just didn't know what they saw. Just like the Kennedy assassination. Somebody saw somebody funny carrying a suitcase somewhere, They just didn't know it. And so that video interview really brought things out.
Okay.
And I got 6 tips from 6 people who saw something there.
And any idea, we're going to mention his name in a moment, and a lot of people probably by this time might have even looked it up, but even though his name is really not out there. But was there a reason these people gave you these tips? Was there a reason that these people picked out this one guy in particular? Did they give you a reason, or did they just say, look at him, but did they give you a reason, a why?
3 or 4 reasons. One is a couple of people said they knew each other and that she had been bothered by the guy. And a couple of 3 of the neighbors said, we know this guy. He's really weird. He's up there on a survivalist camp. He would be the type of person to do it, without saying that that she knew Julie or anything. So they had trouble with the guy, and a survivalist type. And he said he's awfully close to the substation. It's a few miles away, and it's around the corner. And he could have been going by and somebody spotted Julie because nobody knew she was there. Her supervisor didn't leave and follow her or anything. So somebody spotted her. And they had to have a really good reason to attack a substation operator with heavy equipment and electrical stuff around. It wasn't just random. I never did believe it was random. They said, well, this guy knew her. And he's around the corner from the substation. He spotted her. And that was one theory and it sounds pretty good to me, but I can't prove that.
Okay, but what you're saying, these tips, these people didn't know, though, they didn't know Julie, so they couldn't have known that this guy knew Julie, but they just thought this guy was kind of suspicious.
One of them did. Well, one of them knew Julie and knew something about it, yeah. But, and later on, more came out that told me there was contact between the 2, unwanted contact. But by the time the 3 days were up, I probably had 5 or 6 tips naming this guy and 1 or 2 tips naming other people. Any person of interest, suspicious.
Okay, and we're going to get to
like I said, I got 57. Yeah, okay.
We'll get to him, and we'll get to him in a second. But you also interviewed You interviewed people near the substation, like you said, the flyers, but you also had interviewed and talked with former BPA employees, correct? You also had an investigative reporter involved, etc.?
Yes, right. Two investigative reporters with this local newspaper, the Spokesman Review, have been very helpful. I'll give you their names when I give credit to people.
Okay.
The big thing was I already had it arranged on day 2 after we left camping out at the substation to go to Bell Substation, and they already knew I was coming, and they let me in because I was at that time I was a retired. This is 2011, but I'm a retired BPA person. They let me in, but they wouldn't let my partner in because he wasn't BPA. Former BPA. So I actually went in and got ushered into the substation operator offices, and where the substation offices are right at the substation. You walk out the door and you're going to be tripping breakers. So I'm interviewing the two guys there, and they knew all about it. They were upset about it, and they said, well, it's still not solved. And I said, well, so I interviewed them for about an hour. We went over it, and I gave them flyers, and I said, well, I'm going to take off now. And the guy stops me and says, you going back to Portland? I said, well, yeah. Can you take Julie's stuff to her family? I said, stuff? What are you talking about? What stuff? And he points over and said, there's her locker. It's still locked. It's never been opened.
Oh,
and I said, what? You had never searched her locker? She was abducted while working at a BPA site. Didn't they come to the substation? He says, well, I think they did. I think they talked to a couple people. Did they look in her locker? No. So I reported that, and it got searched by the sheriff and the FBI. This was in 2011. We don't know what they found, but the locker had never been searched. It's a newspaper article in the Spokesman Review newspaper. The title of it is Work Locker Never Searched, or Locker Never Searched. And the facts are in there. It's about a full-page article on it.
Right, and by the time, everybody hears our voice on what will be May 22nd, I will have linked to those articles, and I actually probably post some pictures of the stuff that you sent me as well. So listeners will know about maps.
If you can't find them, if you can't find them, I can take a picture of them and text them to you.
Okay.
But it's in the Spokesman Review. It's called Locker Never Searched. It's right there.
Right. That's an incredible story. So once again, she had a locker, as I'm sure all employees did. Maybe they had different work clothes, things like that they kept in their lockers. And you're saying for 24 years that Julie's locker was never opened.
That's correct.
Oh my gosh. That is a crazy story. I remember when you first told me about that, and still even 3 years later, it's still a crazy thing that it is a little hard to believe. What is your understanding? Were people just like walking by it? Was it? It's almost hard to understand what would be going through a person's mind. Do you even know what they were thinking? Just the employees, like, hey, what's this locker doing still locked?
I would have no idea, but normally when time goes on, you forget about things. I mean, the first day there's our locker. Nobody thought they were being interviewed by police, I'm sure. Nobody thought to say, there's our locker, nobody mentioned it. Then all of a sudden, years have gone by, and there's our locker still locked. And nobody had authority to cut it open, and nobody thought about it, That's my guess.
Okay.
That'd just be supposition.
All right, that is crazy. And I should ask this earlier, but being that we are talking about this locker and everything, being that she was working for BPA as a federal company or federal conglomerate or something?
Federal employee.
Okay.
Right.
Was the FBI involved in this investigation at all?
Yes, they were. They originally stepped in because it was a federal worker met harm at a federal center on federal property. And normally today that would definitely be an FBI case. The FBI case number is 7SE 1074. And if you don't know what that means, we had to look it up. A 7 is a kidnapping, and SE is out of the Seattle office. And we're guessing the 1074 meant the 10,074th kidnapping they've looked at.
Wow.
But right away, the sheriff was out there first because they responded out there.
Mm-hmm.
Right away, it was kind of determined that we think she was abducted because she was a girl, not because she was a federal worker. Therefore, it becomes a case for the Spokane Sheriff's Office.
I see.
But there's still an FBI case number assigned to the case.
Would you say that, and once that was determined, did you say the FBI then kind of just backed off? They moved on to other things?
I don't know, but
okay.
I'd have to guess, yes, but I don't know that.
But I guess what I'm saying is primarily over the last 33 years, it's been the county sheriff who has had the authority in this and not the FBI, even though the FBI did have a reason to at least look at it.
Right, that's correct. That's correct.
Okay, thank you. All right, we're getting to that moment. You said you had these tips. There were three, I think you said three primarily from these three names that came primarily from these tips, these flyers, everything that you got back.
That grew to 17. The list grew to 17 suspects.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so wow, that's a lot of suspects. But once again, in going through everything that you sent me back from 2017, it does seem though you kind of narrowed it down to three. Or is that,
right, and pretty soon we narrowed it down to one, and then more and more came in, and we just stayed with the one suspect. I truly believe that's the perpetrator.
Okay.
Based on the evidence I got in.
Okay. Well, we're going to name him right now, and I want the listeners to know that the main reason that John and I waited so long to do this interview, even though we've known each other for like 3 years now, over 3 years, is because this man that we're about to name was known as being litigious, is probably a good word. And he was, anytime his name would come up in relation to Julie's disappearance, he would cause problems for people, even the sheriff's office, in which he got a settlement from them. And because of that, of course, John was very hesitant to come on the program, but I will just give this away now that this man died earlier this year from choking to death while eating in his car, correct? John, is that how he...
Yes, truck.
In his truck. He
his truck,
choked to death while eating in his truck.
The truck.
And he crashed his truck back in January of 2020. But now that he is deceased, we can now talk about him. But once again, we are only going to talk about him in factual form. We're not going after him. We're just going to talk about the information that John gathered in his investigation over the last 10 years. We're going to talk about some things that Will's relationship with the sheriff's department, etc. We are not going after him, but we're just going to talk about the information that John got. What is this man's name, John?
Billy Parks. However, and he's well known up there in the area. A lot of people are afraid of him.
Why don't you? You kind of went out there. You kind of went out there for a second, John. Why don't you say it again, please?
Okay, Will Parks or Billy Parks.
Okay.
However, we tracked him back to Tennessee, which he apparently left sometime in the 70s, and changed his name. He was Billy Powell in Tennessee, like Powell Butte or Powell.
Mm-hmm.
And some people have spelled it vowel, but he apparently, according to a couple of tips I got, left Tennessee and changed his name from Billy Powell or Billy Powell, Billy Powell or Billy Vowell. We think it was Powell.
Okay.
To Billy Parks. It makes sense because it's the same first letter of the last name.
Right.
We don't know why he left or why he changed his name.
Okay, let me just spell that out. So you have a reason to believe that when he was in Tennessee, maybe born there, his last name was Powell, or V as in Victor, Vowell. And then once he moved to Washington, he changed his last name to Parks, P as in Paul, ARKS.
That's what I think, based on what people have told me. I don't have anything in writing to prove that.
Okay.
I just have several different tipsters who don't know each other telling me that. Okay.
Well, for the context of this continuing conversation, we're just going to use his name that he was using when he died. His name was Will Parks. And when was the first time you ever heard his name?
I heard it before we left Spokane when we were there for our 3-day investigation in 2011, and I actually heard it from one of the tipsters who when I was passing flyers out. About 5% of the people were there, so I ended up talking to 5 or 10 people, and this gal lived right down the street. She says, right away I know who it is. It's this guy Powell Parks, brother. Okay. She told me, and I said, whoa. So he was actually the first tip I ever got in a name, and there's 17 people that I suspected or looked at.
All right, so...
And I can't tell you who they are. I can tell you who 2 of them are, but
okay,
most of them are innocent, and I'm not going to give out their names.
Okay, so this Will Parks was the name that came up prominently when you were up there for those 3 days. Okay. So, did you, in getting his name, did you ever attempt to go talk to him about it?
Absolutely not. No.
No.
We found out where he lived, and I said, God, that's right around the corner from the substation, basically. I mean, maybe 5-6 miles. Yeah.
He was mentioned. Do you think that the reason that these people mentioned Will Parks, do you think that they had any animosity to him? Were they just picking on him? You know, was he just like a bad neighbor? Is that the reason they picked him out, or was it something else?
Yeah, I think it's both. I think a couple of people were really had problems with him, and they, you'll turn in your bad neighbor. I think that was part of it, but I also think they genuinely believed he could have been involved.
Okay. Now let's get to the
combination of the two.
Yeah, let's get to the very most important part of this. Did Will Parks, once again, in your investigation over the last 10 years, is there reason to believe that Will Parks knew Julie Weflin?
Yes. And I had a number of people tell me that, and I have firsthand knowledge of two of those.
All right,
You want me to tell you about those?
Absolutely. Let's hear it.
Okay. Another investigator and I went out and interviewed Julie's stepmom, and she was still distraught over it, and she'd married Julie's dad. And she pulled out her diary, and it showed us on page 23 of her diary, there was an entry that Julie feared this guy, Will Parks, had been bothering her. And I have that dated. I tell you exactly when. I don't have it in front of me, but I have the date of that. And then the second thing was, in investigating, the word got out around BPA, et cetera, that I was working on it. And a gentleman, Bill, let me think. I'll think of his name. Anyway, her supervisor, long retired, called me up, and I have it all documented exactly the hour and day that I talked to him. And he said, Julie confided me over and over again that this guy, Will Parks, was bothering her. And she got him. He said she got him kicked out of a club, a famous outdoor club in the area. I can't mention the name.
Yeah, we don't want to do that.
Bothering her there. No.
Okay, so let's go back to the diary for a second. So when did you see this diary? What year was it?
I'd have to look that up in my file, but it'd be around 2012. I can look it up and tell you exactly when it was.
That's good enough. We're just trying to determine this was in the recent past. This was not. This was after you started investigating this with help from others. Okay, in 2011. Okay, so sometime after you were up there for those 3 days is when you had an opportunity to go to Julie's. Was it her stepmother? Her
stepmother, and they still keep in contact. And
okay.
She's elderly now, and but anyway, I got those two different people have said, and I saw it in writing that Julie knew this guy and was afraid of him.
All right, so I'm going to ask you point blank. So she shows you Julie's diary. How did she get Julie's diary? Did she just go get her stuff after?
No, it was her diary, and Julie had put an entry in it. It was the stepmom's diary.
Oh.
And she wrote the entry on page 23 of the diary.
Wow.
It wasn't Julie's diary.
Okay. All right. So it was the stepmother's diary, and Julie wrote in it. And was there a date that Julie? Do you remember if there? People usually date. I'm not a journal taker, or a journal writer, but most people do it by date. Was there a date that that Julie wrote that in that diary?
No, and that was a big mistake. At the time, we didn't have cell phones that had cameras built in them, or I would have taken a photo of it. And I didn't do that. And but I and another person witnessed that being in print on page 23 of the stepmom's diary. But no, we didn't get a photo of it or get a copy of it.
All right. So can you paraphrase exactly what Julie wrote in her mother's diary?
Well, I don't know whether Julie wrote it or a stepmom. It said Julie is afraid of this guy, Will Parks. He's been bothering her. And
okay.
I asked the stepmom if she showed it to the police. She said nobody's ever contacted me. So, because she lives in Portland, and the case is up in Spokane, so why would somebody contact her stepmom?
Right.
I don't know that.
Okay,
but,
so
no.
we can just do a theorizing for just a moment that Julie and her stepmother at some time before September 1987 are on the phone, and Julie tells her stepmother, man, there's this guy I know, his name's Will Parks. He just will not leave me alone. We could theorize.
Right. Of course, Julie's married.
Right. Right, but we can theorize that that's maybe how it could have happened. Maybe.
Yeah, that'd be a theory. But
That
I
would
can't
be a
say
theory.
to it for
Okay.
sure. But
All right, so that's how that might have
I know
happened.
they talked.
Okay.
Julie was still close to her stepmom because her dad had passed away and her stepmom had remarried.
Right. Okay, so in this diary, you saw what Julie's stepmother had written, that that Will Parks was bothering Julie. And then after that, let's go through that again. You said that somebody else called you up, and it had something to do with Julie and Will being in the same club. We're not going to mention the club because it still exists to this day, and we're not here to tarnish it. Yeah.
Right. He's Julie's direct supervisor, William Falk, and he was long retired and pretty old, and he said that she told me over and over again this guy, Will Parks, was bothering her. Again, that's hearsay, but I heard it. I'm not going to ever change my statement. He told me that over and over.
Did he even know, did this guy, when he called you, did he even know that you were even thinking about Will Parks?
No, I don't know that he knew I already had Will Parks on my list.
Okay.
He brought it up, but I'd already heard the name before. And this thing's starting to gel. I'm starting to hear it. Why am I hearing the same name over and over again from different people that don't know each other? There might be something to it. So
yeah, well, we will get into a little bit later why it might have been on some people's minds, but being that his name came up, but and it might have been a little bit of I have to make confirmation bias, but we'll get to that when we do. So you read about Will Parks in this diary. This other guy tells you that Will and Julie might have been in this club together. It's just let's just call it an outdoors club, and that there is a belief out there that maybe because Will was harassing Julie, that Julie got him kicked out of the club.
That's what another person told me, but not this gentleman, not this supervisor.
Okay.
By the time William Falk called me, he was very old and he'd been retired 20 years, But he still thought about Julie because she was his employee at the time. He was her direct supervisor.
Okay. So let's just talk about Will Parks a little more. From Tennessee, might have changed his name. How old would he have been, just off the top of your head? I think he was 68 when he died earlier this year. So he would have been approximately 23, 45.
No, he'd be
45.
He'd be when what happened? When the
disappearance
happened?
Yeah, when the disappearance happened in 1987. How old would he have been?
33 from 68 to 65, 55, 45, 35.
35.
And he'd be in his 30s.
All right, my addition is not good. Okay, so he
68,
would have been.
Take away 30 is.
Yeah.
No, 34, 35.
Okay, and you stated that he lived how many miles from where Julie was abducted?
I'd have to measure it out. It would be maybe 2 or 3 miles as the crow flies, and maybe 8 miles by road. I actually drove it because by that time, one of my tipsters, one of the people I talked to passing out flyers, told me the address and where it was at. So we drove by it on a main road and never turned in his driveway. So we drove from the substation west, took the first turn to the north, put us on Pine Bluff Road, and came around to his place. And it might have been 5 or 6 miles.
Okay. And do you think, once again, now that you have this possible connection between Will and Julie, do you think she knew that he lived right down the street from where she was going that day?
I have no idea.
No idea. Okay. What kind of work does Will do? What's his story? What did he do with his life until he died earlier this year?
I've heard it from several people. He owned a company called Adventure Dynamics, and he trained people in survival. And actually, one of my tipsters is a female lieutenant colonel of the U.S. Army. I'm not going to give her name out. She called me up this last year and said, I was one of the ROTC instructors at Gonzaga, and we used Will Parks for training, but I got a really bad feeling about the guy, and I would not let female cadets go out there alone to his place. I had to be with them. And she called me because she saw I was investigating him, and she wanted to tell me that. And, of course, I got her name and the phone number and everything, and the exact time and date that I talked to her. Everything I've got is documented.
I know. I know that. I know that I know I got the packet. I know you have even more information than that, but I still have every single piece of information you sent me 3 years ago. Yes, you do document everything.
Right.
Great.
I've got about 10 new. Yeah, I've got 10 new tips since then.
Okay.
The one is stellar.
Okay. So I've also looked up his business. I believe the business is now closed now that he's deceased.
It was closed before then. I think he closed it a year or two ago.
Okay. And this is a situation where people go out there and, like you said, I wouldn't call it like it's like supposed to be team building, like maybe businesses send their employees there. They do that kind of thing?
Yes, some of that. That's what it appeared to be, yes. And survival techniques and shooting and camping and how to survive in the wilderness, that kind of stuff.
Okay.
And team building, of course, is part of it.
All right, and I also noticed, in looking into the business, no matter what we may think about Will, it does seem that it got a lot of good reviews. People liked it, had a very good, I think, Yelp rating, or whatever they call it, on a lot of stars on Google. So at least
I don't know about that.
Yeah, I actually looked that up. So,
good.
like 4.5 out of 5 stars. So it seems that was his business. Do you know if he was doing that business at the time of Julie's disappearance in 1987?
I have no way of knowing that.
No idea. Okay. Was he married?
No idea.
Did he have any children?
As my recollection is he's never been married until just lately. But I've heard from a couple of 3 people, including a couple of ex-girlfriends, that they dated Parks, and none of them stayed with him. But
okay.
And I've got those all documented, and that's another avenue. There's talk to exes out of somebody's life, and you find out a lot.
Right, and we've of course talked about that a lot on Unfound. You speaking to ex-wives and things like that. Sometimes they are a good source of information. You just kind of have to wonder sometimes, are they telling the truth or are they just slandering, the ex-husband or ex-boyfriend or whatever. But
sure.
Okay, so you talked to some of them, but I guess what I'm saying is he was a reputable businessman.
Appears so.
Okay. Now, here's the important part, and this is where I mentioned, could there have been a little confirmation bias going on in some of these tips, and that's not your fault, but he had a run-in with the Sheriff's Department in 1999. Why did that happen?
Well, I just found out about it. We knew about it originally because it's in one of my tips way back from my investigative reporter at the Spokane Review newspaper. We thought it was relative to either the Julie Weflin or Deborah Swanson cases. And it's only been in the last week we found out that it was a complaint was called into 911 and they dispatched officers out there. And they had they knew Will Parks had guns. I don't know whether they thought he was a threat or whether it was because he had it was a domestic call, and they sent 7 officers out. This is in the court records. They sent 7 officers out in 3 vehicles, which is quite a lot. And we found out just within the last week that it was a domestic disturbance call is why they went out there. Nothing to do with the missing girl cases, which I understand he was already a suspect with them by that time.
Okay.
By 1999, he's not a suspect because that's clearly documented. People have told me that worked at the sheriff's office. But they went out there because of a call to 911, we need help.
Okay, so 1999, there was a woman who I guess was out there with Will Parks at his place.
I don't know that. They won't tell us what the call was about, except it was a domestic disturbance.
Okay.
They won't tell us what they responded. That's all they'll tell us.
Okay, so that's why they ended up going out there. But why was it then that eventually Will sued them and he actually got money from them? What was the general facts of that?
Not the case here, but I can only guess. I'm just reading the course. It says they violated his civil rights. That they had. He went out to greet them. He didn't know who the cars were coming up his driveway, so he went out with a cell phone and a gun. And they took the gun away from him. And it's in the document. It's in the court document. Mm-hmm. They held him for several hours in a vehicle. He said they wouldn't let him go to the bathroom or give him water, and it was hot. And they searched his property, and then they released him without arresting him. He never got arrested. He was detained. So we sued him on the basis of that. And what I call knowing about court cases, he won a token amount to settle it and just be done with it.
Okay.
He won that amount. He went to court in 2000 2001 and got the settlement of $13,500. Better than pay your legal fees.
Okay.
And, it's public information. You can look this up, and it's there were a lot of stipulations in there that Will could never go after these deputies individually or do this. And it's all just right there in print. It's nothing that I'm making up.
Okay. Do you think, once again, you had not heard about Will Parks' name until 2011 when you put those flyers out there, and some of his neighbors, they're not necessarily next-door neighbors, but neighbors in the substation area kind of pointed the finger at him. But in 1999, you just said that he might have already been a suspect in Julie's disappearance. Do you have any reason to believe that? And what do you think might have caused that?
I have reason to believe that. Yes, I do. I have reason to believe that from about 10 different sources. You want me to start naming them?
Yeah. Well, yeah, please. Well, I'd certainly like to know how law enforcement, his name finally did come up, of course, well before you heard his name. What put them onto him? Yes, please.
Okay, first of all, investigative reporters Bill Moreland and Jody Lawrence Turner both told me he was the lead suspect at the time. The detective in charge of the case in 1987 said he was one of the lead suspects, and he told us personally that he believes he's the right man that did it. And then we had, so he was the suspect looked at in 1987.
Wow.
And that's all I can tell you. And it's and then also the other deputy, which I've talked to personally, drove down to Battleground to talk to me about the case, said that he was the suspect.
Mm-hmm.
And some of these people don't want to be named.
That's fine.
Especially the two deputies. But I've got it all documented. I have their names and phone numbers in my file. If I get subpoenaed, I can prove it. But I'm not giving them out.
Okay, that's fine. My thing, though, is why did they look at him? Did you know what led them? Because, once again, at least the way we, the public, understand it, you show up, she's gone, everything's strewn, across, the substation ground there. We don't know anything about fingerprints or anything else. What exactly would have pointed them in the direction of Will Parks?
I have no idea.
They were never. They never ever told you that. They said he was a suspect, but they wouldn't tell you why.
Correct.
Do you think that's on purpose, or what do you think?
No, they have to keep things confidential. I mean, I was a deputy. They just don't give up that kind of stuff.
Okay.
But if I found out that he'd been threatened, she was afraid of him and been threatening her, somebody else could have found that out. Mm-hmm. It's not real hard to figure that out. I figured it out in 2 days.
Right. Okay.
So that's
okay.
all I can tell you.
All right. Thank you. Do you think when it comes back to, all right, so early on, even though, once again, the public, you working at the BPA, the coworkers and everything, never heard about any suspects, what you now know all these years later is that Will Parks' name actually did come up in late 1987.
Yes.
Okay.
And it might even appear in newspaper articles. I don't know that, but
okay.
Just without going into a lot of detail, I had an open mind, and I have. I'm not going to tell you who they all are, but I have 17 suspects on my list, and one of them is the Green River Killer, and one is Yates, the Spokane serial killer. He's in prison for life and on the death row, and he killed a bunch of girls, but we determined he didn't do it. My investigation determined that he probably wasn't responsible because it wasn't his M.O. He went after prostitutes and not working girls. Mm-hmm. But anyway, I want you to know I had 17 people on my list. They're still on my list of suspects. Several of them are deceased in prison, and there's other connections. But I knew that some of them, I knew that 16 had to be innocent because they can't all be guilty. And it might be that all 17 were innocent.
That's
but
true.
I don't think that way now. I think one of them's guilty.
Right. Okay. Going back to these flyers and these people who pointed, these neighbors who pointed the finger among a few different people, but it seems like Will Parks' name came up the most. Do you think it is possible that the reason they pointed the finger at him is because they knew that he had sued the police department back in 1999? Do you think maybe it had gotten through the grapevine, as things sometimes do, that he had been a suspect since 1987?
No, because they wouldn't have known that because they would have known about it. They might have known about the 1999 lawsuit. Mm-hmm. I'm assuming it might have been in the paper, but it's certainly in the court records I'm looking at right here. But I don't know if these people were that deeply into it. No, I don't think they knew that.
Okay.
Just based on my last, almost all of my Will Parks tips came in before he passed away in January. I had one since then that was willing to give me, and a couple of people gave me a tip of something I didn't know.
I guess what I'm saying is, as I mentioned, could there have been a little bit of confirmation bias going on? And once again, not your fault, but, you start asking people around a substation, about Julie's disappearance, and maybe what comes to mind is, well, there is that Will Parks guy who sued the police department in '99, and, we heard it might have been over domestic disturbance, and, maybe you should go look at him. So they didn't really have any first-line, that's what I'm saying.
No, nobody told me that, because I heard about it was many years later, a few years back, after I've been investigating for several years, that I heard from an investigative reporter, oh, by the way, they arrested him in 1999, and they thought it was because of the Weflin or Swanson cases. And as it turned out, I just found out within the last week or so, it was because of another domestic disturbance call called into 911. It wasn't either of those cases. So my guess is, when they were out there searching his property, they weren't looking for bodies of those girls. They were looking for evidence in the case they were working on. And
okay,
released Parks 5 hours later.
Okay. All right. I think we've probably beaten that topic to the death. Okay. Let's move on to this, and I'll ask you again. I know that you never did personally speak to Will Parks. Is there a reason you never did that? I'm asking because maybe from a public standpoint, you're devoting all this time to it, into this. I think that you take this investigation very personally, but being that his name comes up, you don't ever, just go knock on his door and say, hey, Will, I just thought you'd want to know what I'm doing. Have any comment on any of this?
Yeah, I would not contact him for two reasons. One, I investigate and I put facts together and present it to the legal authorities, which in this case would be the sheriff's office, and I usually CC the FBI. So A, I don't contact suspects, and B, early on I found out this guy was really dangerous, and a lot of people feared him. There's no way. I didn't contact any of my 17 suspects, but I just gather information and forward it on to the authorities.
Okay.
I'm not going to take action. I just ask for input, and then I gather it, document it, and send it in.
Okay. You say that he is dangerous. Does he have a felony record?
No, I was told. I don't know that. People told me they feared the guy, that he threatened them. When they mentioned, what did you do in this? Did you do something to Julie? And he would threaten them. And I got that in writing, but I don't know of any criminal record. There's no way I could find it out. But I did write to the four towns in Tennessee and say, hey, did you have a guy named Willie Powell that lived here and then disappeared? Because we think it's Willie Parks in Spokane, who's a suspect in some cases here, and I never heard back from anybody. But I thought that through, and I was able to find the 4 places that Billy Powell lived in Tennessee, and I sent letters to each police agency. One came back undeliverable. I re-looked it up and found out they'd moved, and I resent it to them. And I never heard back from any of the agencies, and I wouldn't expect to. Last thing they're going to do is tell a citizen something.
How did that even come up?
Make an attempt.
How did that even come up that his name might have been changed? How did you even come across
two
that?
people, a couple of my tipsters who don't know each other, both told me the same story. They told me the name, and one even thought they had. We might even have a court record showing it, but I can't put my finger on it right now. But I heard it from 2 different tipsters, so that was an odd thing to hear. It's not something that somebody would easily make up. That, oh yeah, he left Tennessee and changed his name from Billy Powell to Billy Parks, which, when people change their names, they keep a similar last name a lot of times because it's easier to remember. But I don't know that. I don't know if it's true. I just was told that.
Okay.
I have no way of knowing if it's true, but I wrote to the agencies and said, hey, this is what's going on here. And I rewrote to them again when Parks died. I said, hey, the guy's now deceased. I don't know if you have DNA in any of your cases. I don't know if there's DNA available. Nobody knew DNA back in the 70s.
Right.
Nobody had ever heard of it.
Right.
But I said, I gave him the opportunity to know that this guy was out here and never heard back.
Okay. Do you know if Will Parks was ever given a polygraph test regarding Julie's disappearance, either in '87 up till any time, ever?
Yes, I know he was polygraphed because I got the name of the gentleman who called me. He's one of my tipsters, and he's the one that called me back in January and said Parks is dead. He said that his neighbor, a friend, is a polygrapher at the Spokane Police Department, and polygraphed Will Parks on another matter 3 or 4 years ago, and they stuck in 3 questions on the Weflin case, and he flunked all 3 of them. And if the authorities know this already, I gave him the guy's name, and this guy, okay. I don't know the name of the polygrapher. I just know the name of the guy that called it in.
Okay. All right. So
he's one of my original tipsters. He's one of my original tipsters from 2011. And then he called in and said, "This is after 2011. I don't know when. I'd have to look it up. I've got this all documented. I can give you the date." But he called me a few years back and said Parks was polygraphed and flunked 3 questions on the Weflin case, and he was being polygraphed on another matter. I don't know what that matter was. But,
okay. All right. So we have that. Once again, polygraphs not 100% accurate, and they're just a tool like anything else in trying to figure out a crime. Of course, they are not, cannot be used in court, but I thought I'd ask that. And it's interesting to me, I have to admit, given what I think I know about Will Parks, that I'm surprised he even offered to take a lie detector test. He doesn't seem like the kind of guy that would do that.
Well, I can't guess that. Maybe it was on something he knew he was innocent of. But again, I've got the date, the time, and the phone number of the person who told me this. It's all hearsay. I did not see him take a polygraph. It's all hearsay. But I have no reason to doubt this guy. It was too detailed, and I've got his name and phone number. It'd be very easy for law enforcement to follow up on it if they already haven't, which I'm sure they've done their job. I'm sure they've looked at it.
Okay. Let's just be clear about this, though. Once again, this is I think what we're talking about. This is a lot of circumstantial evidence. I'm not criticizing you or anything. That's mostly what we do talk about on Unfound. Unfortunately, we in disappearances we rarely have any DNA or blood or anything like that, any forensic evidence. A lot of it is just social media and and phone calls and texts, and that's in sightings and things like that. That's what we usually end up talking about because there is no body.
Right.
We don't even know sometimes if these people are really deceased or not. But criminally, when it comes to evidence for a trial, is there any evidence connecting Will to Julie's disappearance that you know of?
Yes, and that didn't come to light until 2018. You know what I always said? My premise was, hey, this substation's out in plain view. There's cars going by. Somebody knows something. And, of course, I got 6 tips from 6 people, including an employee of another electric utility who drove by the substation at 3:30. Said, wow, look, there's a female substation operator. I've never seen one before. Well, he called me recently and said, locked in that time. But, no, back in 2018, I get a call from a guy, and I'm just going to paraphrase it. He says, are you John Polos? I said, yeah. You're looking for the Weflin girl? I said, yeah, what's this about? He says, well, I just saw you on TV. So they obviously played a rerun of my KREN Channel 2 interview in 2011. Says, whoa, that's strange. Well, it's too bad. I didn't know she got abducted. I thought it was a domestic argument. I said, what was? He says, me and my 2 buddies were 13 years old. We were riding bicycles, and we got tired, and we pulled over across the street from the substation in the ditch there and just sitting there, and we watched this guy drive up and abduct her in a van. And I said, why didn't you call it in? He says, well, because they knew each other, calling each other by names, so I figured it was her husband. So they didn't call it in. They went home. 13-year-old kids aren't watching news shows. It came out the next night in the news. They never saw it. It wasn't until he saw the TV interview in 2018 in a rerun that he called me. But he knew 3 things about the case his person might not know, and I can't tell you what those are. I.e., 100 people probably said they killed John F. Kennedy, but they all had the wrong type of gun, So anyway, he knew 3 things that made me believe that he was telling the truth. So I passed that on to both the FBI and the sheriff's office.
Why did he wait? Did he not realize that Julie Weflin was missing?
That's correct. He didn't know about it. I mean, you're out in the country, you're a 13-year-old kid, you're playing games, you're going fishing. And they not even, who knows if they had a TV, but he didn't know about it until he saw me on TV on a rebroadcast in 2018.
Was this, being that he was riding his bike past here, I'm going to guess he lived in the vicinity of the substation. Was his house not one of the ones that you put a flyer on in 2011?
I have no idea. That didn't come up, but
Okay.
I asked him if he could get a hold of his two buddies, and he said, I've lost track of them. I don't know where they're at. But there were three of us there that saw the same thing.
And so you passed this on to the FBI, you said, and the county sheriff?
Yeah, but it passed it on to the county a little later.
Okay.
I passed it on to the FBI, and I got to talk to a special agent at the FBI in 2018. And I heard from him back again, and he says, and I can't tell you his name, but he's at the FBI office in Spokane. Anybody in authority, anybody in a police agency, I'll give him his name and phone number. He said later that he interviewed the witness, and he says he's believable. But I got to tell you, John, this is not an FBI case. This is it was originally, but it's a Spokane sheriff's case. So I interviewed him. I believe what he said was true, and I passed it on to the sheriff's office.
Okay. Let's move on to this. Being that we've talked so much about Will Parks, do you know, over the years, once again, this is 1987, and he didn't die until 33 years later in 2020. Do you have any, do you know if the sheriff's department ever once in a while went back to talk to him, or do you think that they were scared off after that lawsuit from 1999?
Well, most of their talking would have been way before 99. I know the original detective on the case talked to him right after the incident, but I don't, because he told us that, and he developed evidence. He believed he was guilty, but that's believing isn't proving. Again, and you'll see in the other two girls, none of these bodies have ever been found. There's three similarities in all these cases. They're beautiful young girls. They have professional jobs: school teacher, nurse, substation operator. They were abducted and never found again. Mm-hmm. So they're all real similar.
Oh, yeah, and we're going to get to Deborah and Kathryn here shortly.
Sure.
Now, of course, we've talked about Will Parks. He knew Julie. Sounds like he could have had a grudge against her. He lives very close to this area. We're not sure if Julie knew he lived near there or not. Of course, we could visualize a scenario, but we really do not, get into theories on the program when we're not certainly trying to go after Will Parks, whether he is deceased or alive. But I do have to ask you, John, is that in many places you will find that, at least at the time in 1987, law enforcement thought that this abduction was committed by more than one person. Can you rationalize that? We've only talked about Will Parks. Is there any proof that he could have had help, or does that kind of get in the way of thinking that Will Parks did this at all?
Okay, thanks. That's a great question. Of all my 57 tipsters, and by the way, my key thing has always been somebody saw something, they just don't know it. One of my 6 tipsters that went by the substation area or was in the area at the time is the only person who's ever said he thinks it was 2 people. He was driving a log truck, and he might not have even been near the substation. And he said, I saw girls struggling with 2 guys in a van going the other way, and I tried to turn my log truck around. I turned it around and chased them. I could never catch them. So I went back, picked up my wife, and went in and gave a statement to a sheriff's officer at a sheriff's substation. And that's the only person that's ever said to me they thought it was 2 people.
Okay, so what you're saying is it very well could be that the reason that this has been written some places could be because of this one particular person.
No, nobody knew about this person until he called me in 2011. And unless he told somebody else.
Okay.
The first I'd heard about it was when he called me in 2011 and said, this is what I saw. I was driving a log truck, 2 people in a van with a girl fighting.
Okay.
And I don't know if that ever came out before. I have no way of knowing.
Okay. The way you went, of course, you were not there. We know that you weren't there, to see the aftermath of this abduction, kidnapping, whatever you want to call it. Have you ever heard anything from law enforcement or people on the scene? I'm guessing maybe there were some other power people who were there as well. Anything that would have led them to believe that actually more than one person was involved, or was this kind of just an inference?
I never heard anything from anybody other than this one person that there were two involved. I've never heard anything.
Okay.
Never seen anything in print and stories ever.
Okay. So all right. So what we're saying maybe is that this Julie's disappearance was caused by more than one person is maybe what we might call it a minority theory.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Because I guess what they're saying, it sounds to me there's no evidence of that. And it very well may just be that they just took that for granted at the time, people who were working on it. So I guess what we're saying is even though people may read that out there's not necessarily any evidence to support that. Although it could have happened. We just don't know. If we knew what happened, we could just go solve it right now.
I don't know. I don't know what I don't know.
Okay, that's true. Okay. So, and would you say this is still, or maybe I need to ask you this. When you, how did you react when you found out that Will Parks died this past January?
Well, I couldn't believe it because I was afraid of the guy. I didn't want to deal with him. He threatened people. And I can prove that he threatened a lot of people because I've got it in writing. And he was the kind of guy that says, if you call me a killer, I'll kill you. He was just a very scary person. And one of the investigative reporters said that they didn't want to get near this guy. They feared for their life. So right away, I've heard that, it's just hearsay. I've heard that from several different people. I didn't no way I ever wanted to meet the guy and go ask him, hey, did you kill Julie? No.
Okay.
By the way, I want to make something really clear.
Please.
When I talked to the witness in 2018 who called me up and saw the bicycle boy who saw the abduction,
yes,
I never mentioned the name Will Parks, and I've never sent him photos of Will or anything because I don't want to taint the case. But when he described the person he saw, it sounded like what Will Parks would have looked like 30 years before.
Okay.
But I'm not going to go into details. That's one of the three things that made me believe this guy was telling the truth.
Okay.
He described the suspect as a young Will Parks.
Okay.
He's got a very interesting build and a very interesting face. He described it to a T.
Okay.
And
it should be known.
Writing.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. Anyway, I document everything. I've got it in writing. Got the time and date. He told me that. And I can't remember everything. I can't remember what I had for breakfast yesterday. Yeah, I can remember. But when I put it down in writing, I never lie to myself. So if I got it in writing, it's true.
I believe you. I think what we're saying here is that he's describing somebody who he had never, this witness who was 13 at the time, would have been describing to somebody he didn't even know existed.
Correct.
Okay. And it should be known, if you really, for the listeners, if you really, up until today, if you really looked hard, you might have been able to find Will Parks' name out there. But that's about the only way. It's
appeared in some articles. I've got. Yeah. I think I might even have some, but you can Google. Review news. You Google his name. I don't know. I tried to find out more about him, and I tried to find out who Bill never been able to be successful at that. Yeah. But in the 70s, what were records like,
Yeah. It's just, once again, I think because of his reputation, and I think also maybe because this disappearance is 33 years old, that, his name is not prominent out there, unlike many other disappearances where a suspect is known and they are this person is talked about freely on Web Sleuths and other places or Charley Project. But Will Parks, as far as prominent suspects go, and once again, in my opinion, and being a suspect in disappearance, his name is not been one of the ones that has been out there. Not under, that's not my impression. Okay, so that is. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Being that he is now deceased, who owns the property that he lived on there, not far from the substation?
I was told that his widow, his wife, he did get married, and I think that's, as far as I know, he's only been married the one time. And she lives on the property. As far as I know, somebody told me that. They looked it up. They can look up the records, and that's just hearsay again. But I was told within the last 2 months that she lives on the property.
Do you know of any attempts that the sheriff...
Or at least least owns the property. She might not live on it, but she owns the property.
Okay. Do you know of any attempts by the sheriff's office to, now that Will Parks is deceased, to try to get on that property to search it?
I do.
Okay.
But I can't tell you about it.
Okay.
I can't tell you about it, but I do know of it.
Okay. I just have to ask
There's
you because
certain things that I've been asked not to talk about.
Okay. I have to ask.
But again, I have it documented. I have it. This officer told me this on this date at 4:30 in the afternoon. I have it documented, but I'm not allowed to talk about that.
Okay. Well, because I have my job, I have to do this. Do you know if anybody has been on the property since Will Parks disappeared or Will Parks died?
I do not.
Okay. All right. So we have Julie Weflin. Seems like we have a decent suspect, and we have, it seems, more than one witness that saw something happen there that day. I have to admit, John, I'm still a little puzzled why maybe they weren't taken more seriously or why they didn't call 911 or something like that, but we're not going to theorize that, at that point. But Will Parks seemingly knew Julie. He lives not far away. It seems like they had a beef. We have this entry in the diary. We have some decent circumstantial evidence. So let's move on to another girl, another young woman. I don't want to call her a girl, but a young woman that has come up in relation to Will Parks, and her name is Deborah Swanson. She disappeared from Coeur d'Alene the year before, approximately a year and a half before Julie disappeared. Why don't you just give the general facts as you understand them for her disappearance, and then we'll talk about how, this all intertwines.
Okay. Well, basically, she was at a party that might have involved some same people from this outdoor club, and she told people she wanted nothing to do with Will Parks, and he was the last person seen with her, so he was right away a suspect. 4 people told me of the connection of Will Parks to Deborah Swanson. Want me to tell you who they are?
Well, we're not going to get into the names, but I think that's important.
Anyway, I got 4 different people that said that she was he was one of the last persons seen with her, and she disappeared. They never found her.
Okay. Maybe I'll just say this. She was a young woman from Coeur d'Alene, which would be Idaho, which is right across the river from Spokane, and she went for jogging in a park there, and she disappeared. Her car was found, everything was found in her car, and the park was searched. Of course, she wasn't found, and it's still a missing persons case to this day. When did you first hear about her name being related to Will Parks and Julie's disappearance?
Okay, back in 2011, after I got back, one of the first things that happened was I was contacted by investigative reporter Bill Moreland, and he and the actual deputy who responded to the scene drove to Battleground, Washington to talk to me. And they said that he was the suspect in the disappearance of Deborah Swanson. And the actual detective assigned to the case, not this officer, said that he was the lead suspect. He told our people that he is 100% sure Will Parks abducted Deborah Swanson, and he's 99.9% sure he abducted Julie Weflin. And again, that's third-party hearsay. But in talking to, I keep in contact with Julie's relatives and Deborah's relatives, and Deborah's sister told me that she knew Will Parks did it. So that's 3 different sources.
And so you kind of just went over that very quickly right as we started this. So you're saying that Deborah Swanson was in the same outdoors group as Julie was?
I can't prove that yet, but I've tried, but I was denied access to the records of that outdoor club, so I can't prove it. But I've got a couple of people who said, hey, I went on an outing with Will Parks. I'm going to write you a letter on that he was in that outdoor group.
Okay.
And I've heard it from several different people that that's where she filed her complaint, Julie, and got him kicked out, but I can't prove that. And the way to prove it, these clubs put out an annual every year of list of members. So Joe Dokes, you're looking for Joe Dokes. He's in it in 1986. He's in it in 1987 and 1988. And after that, he's not in the club roster anymore. That would be your first clue, and that's information you could dig. But I went into that club told them what I was doing, and they threw me out. I wasn't allowed to see the records. But those records exist in 100 different places. All the members, a lot of members probably have roster lists. And if you dig into it, you can find that he was in, and all of a sudden, after this date, he wasn't in anymore.
Okay.
But I'm not allowed to do. I'm not going to. I don't do things that I'm not supposed to do. So I asked them, told them up front what I wanted to do, and they said no. You get out of here.
Right. You don't want to. Yeah, you want to do it surreptitiously, of course. Any proof that Deborah and Julie knew each other?
I've heard that, but I don't have proof of that. But maybe Julie's relatives or Deborah's sister would know that. I've heard it, but I don't know it. I have no written evidence that shows they knew each other.
Okay. How is it that there's this possibility that Will Parks might have been the last person to see Deborah Swanson? How did that even come up?
Well, a whole bunch of witnesses, they were at a party together somewhere, and Parks was there and she was there, and he was allegedly wanted to date with her, and she didn't want to go out with him. And it's allegedly in the police investigation by the original detective on the case. But I've heard it from Deborah's sister, and I've heard it from a couple other people too. And I don't know if there was ever anything in writing saying, "Hey, this suspect did this." I don't have a newspaper article saying that.
Right.
Because you're not going to do that. You're not going to put your neck out and say, "Hey, he abducted a girl," when he's not even charged.
Right. Well, of course.
I don't have anything in writing. I have comments from people, and I've documented them. I have the date and time of the comment that this took place.
So was this a party the day before she disappeared, or a week before? Any ideas?
The night before she disappeared. She was missing the next day.
The night before she was, there was a sighting. These people will say they saw.
The last time she was seen.
Okay.
As far as I know, this was the last time she was ever seen. Was when she was with Will Parks at the party.
Are you saying, John, there's a possibility that she really even didn't go jogging the next day? That somebody just made it look like that?
I don't know. I'm just telling you what I know. I don't know that.
Okay.
You may be right.
Okay. So what you're saying is there was this party, and people at this party say they saw Deborah and Will Parks together.
Correct.
All right. I'm not saying that they went there together. I'm not saying they were boyfriend and girlfriend. In fact, it sounds like they were the exact opposite. But that he was at this party, she's at this party. Next day, she disappears, and then Will Parks just happens to also know Julie Weflin, and who disappears a year and a half later.
Correct.
Okay. And the listener should know, although it has not been recently, I have also spoken to Deborah Swanson's sister, but I believe that might have been back in 2017 that I was able to track her down and talk to her a little bit. I don't know if I told you about that, not John, but yeah, I did have at least one conversation with her, maybe only one conversation, but I did speak to her back then as well, tracking her down.
What did she say?
Excuse me?
What did she say?
I did not dig those notes out. I know that I did take some, but I just wanted. I think the conversation, the way I remember it in general, was that I told her that although I'm a reporter and I'm reporting on a different disappearance every week, I told her that there were people, including you, that were working on Julie Weflin's and Deborah's disappearances. And I told her that this is an ongoing thing, and I had complete confidence in what was going on. And I wanted her to know that, her sister hadn't been forgotten. It just may take some time, just not knowing. And, she knew, of course, like you said, about Will Parks. And I think she also knew that, his name could not be released publicly, for reasons we've already talked about. But I reassured her that there were people, although they, not working for the government, but private people, you might even call, in a word, amateurs, I guess, working on this and trying to put all this together. So that's, I think I think I did get into a little bit about her sister. Once again, I did not have the notes out for this interview, but I did talk to her, and I think that she's very grateful that her sister had not been forgotten. But she also told me that she believed Will Parks is responsible, and she did say, something about, I do remember about this party. So here we have Deborah. Have you ever gone to that park, looked around or anything, in your investigation, John, just to get a feel for it?
Absolutely not. No, I didn't learn about Deborah till later after I'd left Spokane, and I intended to never go back to Spokane again after that, just because of things that happened there.
Okay. You live in Oregon now?
I live in Washington, across from Portland, Oregon.
Washington, across from Portland.
Across the river.
Okay, very good. I have
Battleground, Washington.
Okay, I have a nephew. My nephew John lives in Portland. That's interesting. Okay.
He's a wise man.
Okay, yeah. I've never been there. So I'm just wondering, I've looked at, I've never been to Coeur d'Alene, but I've looked at a map of the park. It's right there on the water. Once again, to your knowledge, I'm just asking you to your knowledge. Was there the idea maybe that Deborah could have, did they think this was a real abduction, or were they thinking at the time that maybe she committed suicide, jumping into the water, something like that?
I don't know. I cannot speculate on that.
No idea. Okay.
Her sister said she was a very happy person.
Mm-hmm.
So.
All right. So we have this connection. People at this party saw them together. You've been in contact with her. If I may ask, when was the last time you spoke to Deborah's sister?
I gave her a phone message a couple of days ago, but I talked to her maybe a couple, 3 months. I talked to her personally after Will Parks was deceased. But I give her updates and leave it on her voicemail or text it to her. That was probably 2 days ago. I texted her something.
Okay.
But I probably I was going to be on the podcast.
Right. Okay. And I'll make sure. I think I still have her email. I'll make sure she gets a link to it. Okay. So we have this disappearance. So now, we're looking at Will Parks seemingly knew both of these women, and both these women disappear within a year and a half of each other, and not very far away from each other either, although we do have to admit that Will did not live in Coeur d'Alene, did not live near there, but he could have been in the area if he went to this party the night before. That brings us to Kathryn Gregory, which is a disappearance that happened, 6 years before Julie's disappearance, 5 years before Deborah's disappearance.
Yes.
When did her disappearance come on your radar, and how did Will Parks get wrapped up in this one as well?
I developed it. One of the things I did is I decided to go back to about 1970 and look at every missing person case in the greater Spokane, Coeur d'Alene area. And it grew over the years. It's now at 56 girls, women. Mm-hmm. At the time, it was maybe 25 or 30, and I called it one time I called it the missing 40. And these were cases, not somebody that was murdered by their spouse and it was solved right away. These were ones that weren't solved right away. And of those 56, about 20 of them have been solved. And a lot of them are attributed to Yates, the serial killer, or to other things. And so at the time, I compiled a list, and I got all these flyers from the Charley report and other things. And I got a flyer in for Rahe Gregory. And by the way, she had just gotten married a few months before, and Julie was married, and Deborah Swanson was single at the time of her disappearance. Mm-hmm. So I get this flyer in, and I'm looking at it. Young girl, really attractive, has a professional job, abducted, disappeared, and no trace ever found. Bing, bing, bing. 3 similarities in the modus operandum. A cute young girl has a professional job and no body ever found. That's the only one of the 56 that jumped out at me. And I said, well, that's sure the way this other guy, Will Parks, operated if we believe that he did those other 2. I said the MO is the same. So that's how I put her on the list. I don't have any evidence. Okay. It's just the crime was really similar and no other evidence.
Okay. And we should know that the general facts, although I've never spoken to anybody in Julie's family, but like I said, I have spoken to Deborah Swanson's sister, but I haven't spoken personally to anybody in Kathryn's family, so, I don't know necessarily what they think. Have you spoken to anybody in her family?
Absolutely not, but I talk to Julie's relatives all the time. I've talked to Julie's relatives within the last 24 hours.
Okay, but I've
never talked to Rahe Gregory's relatives.
Okay, any reason for that?
No, well, it was late into it was a year or two into it after I got after I compiled a list, which has now grown to 56 women abducted missing from Spokane under suspicious circumstances that weren't solved immediately. I mean, there's way more than that have been killed in Spokane, but these are the ones that weren't solved immediately. And when I got her flyer in, I started looking at it. I said, there's one photo where she looks exactly, in fact, it's on a flyer, she looks exactly like Julie, exactly, the hairstyle, everything. And I said, God, she looks just like Julie. Oh, wait a minute. She was a professional girl. She was a nurse going home from school or something. Click. Oh, wait a minute. No body ever found. Most of the times you find a body. So 3 things clicked with similarities with the Swanson and Weflin case. No hard evidence. It looks similar.
Okay.
And that's why I put her on my list. I'm happy to have somebody disprove me.
Right. Well,
that's as far as I know, they.
Well, I guess what I'm asking, John, is, you've talked to somebody in Deborah's family, you've talked to somebody in, several people or different people in Julie's family. I'm just wondering if Kathryn is also one that you think you could attribute to Will Parks. I'm just wondering. I'm not criticizing. I'm just asking. Is there a reason you haven't contacted anybody in her family yet?
Yes.
Well, please explain.
Yeah, there's a reason. The reason was there's absolute correlation that Parks was involved with Julie, and Parks was involved with Deborah. So once I found out that he was a suspect in the Deborah Swanson case, then I started pursuing that. But there's no evidence at all that Will Parks was involved with Rahe Gregory.
You mean Kathryn Gregory?
Just circumstance. Kathryn Rahe Gregory.
Okay.
Gregory is her married name. She just got married.
Right.
The only thing is there were similarities in the case, just like when you're tracking something. The similarities of the MO, the modus operatum of the case, was similar enough that I put her on my list, and I can do that. And I'm happy to have somebody disprove me. But it was similar enough that if you could solve you solve one case, you solve the other. So.
Yeah. Well, I guess what I'm saying is it would be interesting. I mean, I don't know if her parents would be alive anymore. Probably not.
Yeah.
But, if she had any siblings.
Because I have no direct.
Please.
Go ahead. I didn't want to do it because I had no direct connection that he might be connected. Will Parks might be connected to that case. It was only supposition-based circumstantial evidence and no direct evidence based on it being a similar incident. And it was the only one of the 56 that was similar. So that's why I put her on my list. Because if I don't put her on the list, and there's a connection that we overlook, because if it was a connection and we solved that case, we solved the others. These bodies have to be somewhere.
Well, they do. I guess what I'm saying, John, is that maybe contacting, once again, I'm going to guess that Kathryn's parents are deceased by now, given her age in 1981. I mean, her parents, if they're alive, would have to be well into their 90s. But, if contacting a sibling or somebody who knew her well, it might turn, if you ask, maybe, well, you know what? She did know a guy named Will Parks, or you know what? She was in that outdoors club, etc. That's what I'm asking.
Yeah,
and the only way to know that was to try to find somebody who knew her. That's why I guess I'm asking this.
Well, her new husband, last name was Gregory, and he was a radio announcer in Spokane. But I've never contacted him. It was a year or two into the investigation that she popped up because I got the flyer.
Yeah.
And then I looked at the similarities, and I said, oh, that's too similar. There might be a connection.
Well,
so rather than not included, I included it.
Well, I think it was smart to do that because I know and maybe other people are going to do this too, but that's why we do the program. That's why we do, and that's why we do the program. I discovered, I looked at the location that Kathryn Gregory was allegedly last seen. She was a nurse very close to where she worked, and I don't know where she was living at the time. I'm sure that maybe we could find that out somewhere. There's probably some public records on the internet somewhere that could document that. But Will Parks was living in Spokane, Washington at the time, and it was only a few blocks away from where she was last seen.
No way, I didn't know that.
That's a fact.
I have no idea where Will Parks is.
Yeah, I have the way to figure that out, and I'll show you in a minute.
You need to write that up and mail it to me because you'll be tip 58.
Okay.
That's how I get tips. That's a tip.
Great. All right. Well, I will send that to you.
Or mail it to me.
I will send that to you.
Yeah, that's going to be tip 58.
Okay.
That's how I get things. They just pop out at you. Oh, yeah, well, I saw the guy grab her and drag her out. What?
Yeah,
Tell me about it, So that's a really important tip. I had no way of knowing if Will Parks was even in town then.
He was.
I did not know he lived near her. Oh, wow. Well, it
seems to me that he had just moved there. If we're to believe that he moved from Tennessee, I think that he had just moved into the Spokane, Washington area. But he lived about the same distance away from where she was last seen, as about the same distance as how far he lived, as the crow flies, from where Julie disappeared. About 2 miles.
Wow. Okay, I'm gonna make sure you send that to me because
I won't forget.
I need to have that as a tip.
Okay, I won't forget.
I won't let you forget.
No, okay.
Next thing you get tips.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
That's great. The thing is, if we were talking about this in terms of Will Parks and these other disappearances, it does occur to me once again with my experience is that it very well may be that Kathryn's, husband could at least be considered a suspect. I have to, and the listeners know what I'm talking about here is that, his story is just like, well, yeah, she left to work and she was never seen again. That's generally what it is. At least on the public record. I'm sure there's a lot of stuff behind the scenes, but being that none of us have talked to her family, I don't know how I would know any more than what's, been reported. It is one of those disappearances where I'm guessing the husband, gets a long look, because, well, she just left and I don't know what to tell you. But but factually, Will Parks did live not far from where she was last seen. So
send me everything you can on that. Even
I will.
If you've got addresses of both sites, send it all to me.
Okay.
And I'll be encrypted into my
all right. And I certainly think that some of her family should be tracked down. I think that they probably, deserve to know that at least her name has popped up. I think they'd like to know that at least somebody is trying to put some, things together. All these years later that she hasn't.
That's a good point. Before I forget, let me tell you that the Gregory case is Spokane Police. Julie Weflin is Spokane Sheriff's Department.
Yeah.
And Deborah Swanson is Coeur d'Alene Police. And I talked to the lieutenant at Coeur d'Alene Police. I probably could give you his name, but I've got it. And he told me that Parks was a suspect. It was a Coeur d'Alene police case.
Okay.
So that's one more connection that with Swanson. And I talked to him several times. He's long retired now, but I have it all documented what I talked to him about when.
Because I have this, and the listeners know we use an interview outline for all of the interviews that we do for the program because I like them to be very orderly. But I, from my experience, all three of these disappearances are quite different. I know that they may have been, done by the same guy, maybe or maybe not, but they are all very different. It seems like Julie's was. If we're to believe that Will Parks did it, it seems like it was just bad luck. Is that how would you portray it?
Yeah. Yes.
Whereas in Deborah's case, it seems like, she's going out for a jog and maybe he was stalking her, which is something totally different. He's following her. And then in the third, at least for now, because we know a lot less about Kathryn's disappearance than we know about the other two, Kathryn's, it doesn't sound like it would be a stalking situation, but it doesn't sound like it would be, bad luck either. It's like somewhere in between. So I have to tell you, as a guy who's covered 170 disappearances, these three disappearances are somewhat different, in the modus operandi, but, we'll just... One, like I said, Julie's is a full-on abduction. Deborah's is, once again, somebody stalking her into the park, and then somebody was able to take her out of the park without anybody seeing, which, is interesting. And then Kathryn was...
These bodies usually surface. These bodies usually surface in those cases. All three of these, no bodies.
I know. And so we must believe that Deborah, if she was abducted, she was taken back out of the park, being that the park was searched. So that is taking some chances. And then with Kathryn, she was abducted in the middle of a city, during the day, right by where she worked, which once again,
I think she was coming out of class. She was going to school to get another career path going, and she was leaving school is what I don't know if that's true. I just heard that.
So once again, you wonder how somebody could have just abducted her right off the street in the middle of the day. So once again, it just seems to me that the modus operandi of all three is a little bit different, and that could lead to believing three different people caused them, but maybe not. We just don't know. Let's talk about you again, John, and then I know you certainly want to thank all the people who have assisted you over the last 10 years. How has this affected you? Since 1987, you're an engineer. You were a part-time deputy or a reserve deputy, whatever they call it. But I'm guessing that you probably never could have expected getting into this, and how has this affected your life?
Oh, my wife is nagging me to do chores. Other than that, I've had a few ups and downs because I made some people mad with some of the things I did, and I got that personal things happened to me that affected me but I'm all over that now, and it's been a really rewarding experience, especially if we can solve it, which I think we have. Solved and cleared is two different things. Solved means you're sure it's happened. Yeah. Cleared means the agency having responsibility says, this is what happened and we're closing the case. I can't close the case, but I think I've solved it. So I've had a few ups and downs in my personal life, but I'm a really strong person. I served in the Navy. I spent 30 years as a scoutmaster, and I've received quite a few. I've received 3 lifetime achievement awards from 3 different organizations. So I have a good feeling about who I am. I don't have problems with myself. I figured, well, that happened. That's a loss.
I'm wondering, being that you're 77, you are, if I consider that, I think you already did say that, you're like 6 years younger than my dad, who is still with us. And, hearing about Julie's disappearance, do you have any children? Do you think that affected your parenting any?
No, by then, let's see. My youngest kid would have been, he would have been a junior in high school, my son. And my daughter was already graduated out of high school. And graduating or just about to graduate from college, didn't affect him at all. Did not, except that I worry about things. I worry about my granddaughters. I've got 4 of them. I'm not worried about them because I've seen this stuff happen.
Right.
And I mean, you can be safe, and you turn your back for 1 second, and they're gone. So it more affected me with my granddaughters.
What advice, being that you've been doing this for 10 years, and you've of course mentioned this other disappearance that you worked on before Julie's, what advice would you give to other just common people out there that feel like they must get involved, like you thought you must get involved? What would be your advice to them?
Somebody knows something. Document everything. Document it, and then take pictures of everything you can. If I'd have taken a picture of Julie's stepmom's diary, I'd be way ahead of the game. I'd have more people believing me. Document everything. And I've documented everything. And like I say, somebody can say, well, that's a lie. But I said, why would I lie to myself and put that in writing and then have a time and date on it? None of I can, if you want to dig into it, you'll find out it's true. So documentation, look for detail. I mean, I thought of, hey, I'm going to count cars going by the substation. Well, why would you do that? Because then I can extrapolate backwards. If there's a car a minute going by, the abduction took a few minutes. Somebody saw something, and that turned out to be the truth. 6 people saw something. So document and don't stick your neck out. Don't contact suspects and pass it on to the authorities. And I think any crime can be solved if you had enough resources. Your neighbor gets burglarized. If they could assign 100 deputies to it, look at everybody's video surveillance cameras, you can solve any burglary. The problem is the deputy's got to run to the next one. He doesn't have time. He writes it up, and tomorrow he'll key it into the computer. But you can solve almost any crime if you can put enough resources into it.
Right.
And I'm the resource. I was willing to do that.
Yeah. And once again, here at 77 years old, you're still a full-time worker, full-time employee, correct?
And I'm in search and rescue, and I'm a Young Eagles pilot right now.
Wow.
I stopped flying last year, but I fly kids in the Young Eagles program, and I'm still a Boy Scout leader.
Are you ever going to retire, John?
I doubt it. That'll kill you, man. I haven't planned on it yet, but never, 5 years ago, I would have never guessed I'd be a school teacher. I always liked working with the kids because I was a scoutmaster, but no, I never. It was an accident waiting to happen.
Okay. You know, you mentioned the diary. Could you not go back and get it again, or is that not possible?
No,
or?
I tried, and she remarried and moved and threw a bunch of stuff away, including the diary. But yeah, so we don't have it. But it's okay. It just the fact that it said Julie feared this guy doesn't prove he's guilty. What it does prove is that she knew him, and there's some people out there who are disputing that Julie knew Will Parks, and I'm actually working on that now. I'm going to have a notarized letter of some of the things that prove that Julie knew Will. And if somebody were to track down this adventure club and look at their records, they could figure it out. If they talked to a member in it that said, "Oh yeah, we had a board meeting on that, and we kicked her out, and then we agreed to never talk about it." They don't want to advertise. XYZ Club doesn't want to say we kicked a guy out because he was bothering girls in our club.
Yeah.
Just like the same thing in the Boy Scouts. I got rid of a guy I suspected to be a child molester, and I didn't make a big deal out of it. I got rid of him really quick, and he hadn't done anything, but I didn't turn him in to anybody. I just made sure we got rid of him. So.
Okay. This is the opportunity, John, that you can take to thank all these people who have, and of course you're not done. You're still working on this. If not every day, when you have the time. So why don't you? I got a
new tip today.
Yeah, from me. That I'm going to that I will put. Yeah, that's how it happens, and I will of course document that for you. This is the opportunity you can take to thank all those people who've worked with you so far. Please do so.
I want to do that. I want to talk to you about the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 people who I wasn't able to get a yes back to, and also told me they didn't want to. The 2 deputies, retired deputies, don't want their names given out.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and the fellow that went up to Spokane, he's off in the Navy, and I can't get his permission. And then 2 of the people on 2 of my BPA team members weren't able to get back to me, so I don't have their permission.
Mm-hmm.
But I will name the people. We're talking 12 people here. I'll tell you the people who have helped me and have been very active. BPA retirees, Ken Westby, Charles Ferris, and Bob Windus. And Bob is a colonel in the Army, reserve colonel. He was in intelligence in Vietnam, and he became the chief of security for BPA. And he was head of the security office when she disappeared. His dad had been a pilot with BPA, so he's a BPA brat. That means your father or mother worked there.
Mm-hmm.
So he's always felt bad because he was the guy in charge of security when it happened. And he spent a lot investigating it, and he felt enough about it. Like, he's my deputy team leader on our team that's still investigating things. Further, there's a Portland policeman who's on our team, and he's been helping us for the last year or so. And there's no reason I can't give you his name, except he never got back to me and said give it out. So I can't give his name out. And then there's 2 more people on our team. There's civil engineer Bonnie Gow. She's in Spokane. She's a well-known civil engineer. She heads up a lot of projects. She's one of our investigators. There's 2 of them. There's 4 actually in Spokane. And then there's also Jody Lawrence Turner, who's now in another location, but she was an invested reporter with the Spokesman Review newspaper. And then a big help has been Bill Moreland. He's probably been the most help. He's still attached newspaper, but he's a retired investigative reporter with the Spokesman Review newspaper. So those, and then one of the most important people is Jeff Spurley. I just talked to him yesterday. Jeff Spurley's been on our team for 2 years. He's Julie's nephew, Julie Weflin's nephew. So, and Julie's stepmom is his grandmother. So he's the family rep, and he's actually on our team.
Great.
He's been doing some things lately that are still underway. He's trying to get some information from people under Freedom of Information Act, et cetera.
Right.
So those are our team members.
Great.
And the ones I can't mention, or we're thinking about them every minute, but I can't give out their names. I don't have their permission.
That's fine. Okay. That's quite a few people, but that's not surprising, knowing that you've been working on this for 10 years, and you have a lot of different people with a lot of different pieces of knowledge. Once again, from law enforcement to people who worked for BPA. And then I think I actually spoke to Mr. Windus way back in 2017. I think you had given me his number, and I actually spoke to him way back when. So I recognize that name. So that's great. And
Bob's a great guy. Yeah, Bob's a great guy. BPA has been great. They've had a reward. They've supported us. They'd love to have the case cleared. And law enforcement is, they can only do so much, and they've been doing the best they can do with resources. I can't fault them.
Right.
But sometimes you have to point out things to them. That they don't. You don't know this. It's not intuitive. I had no idea until 10 minutes ago that Will Park lived near nurse Rahe Gregory.
Yeah.
I had no idea. That's really. I think that's kind of.
You'll see it. You'll see it when I send it to you. But maybe we should. I just ask you this, and I'm not going to get into the relationship that you have with the sheriff's office. But do you think they think that Will Parks, frankly, murdered Julie Weflin?
Well, he's still on their suspect list. The case is not closed, but the current people working on it thinks it could have been somebody else. Another guy died, who was an inmate and died in prison somewhere else. By the way, that person is one of my 17. The person they think did it, could have done it, is one of the 17 people on my list of suspects, and he's deceased. But they won't tell me why they think he did it. I mean, because they don't have bodies, they don't have any evidence, or they would have cleared the case. So I don't know how much evidence they've got. I've got a lot of evidence. I don't know how much they've got. I have no idea, and they won't tell me, and they rightfully should not tell me. I don't know what they found in Julie's locker when they searched it.
Right. And we don't even know. And we don't even know if they did forensics on her vehicle. Maybe there was fingerprints or something that led them to some other person. We don't know.
No, I've heard there's no I've heard that for sure, that there were no fingerprints found at the scene.
Okay.
I know that because I talked to two deputies.
Okay. All right. John, any last words before we complete this interview?
Yeah, just send me your tip. Send tips. I love them. And this all developed out of nothing. I started out with nothing. I started out with an idea. But 3 days after I went up to Spokane, by the time that 2.5 days was over, I had a lot. I already had a suspect in mind. I had 3 suspects in mind, and eventually became 17. And the first suspect I ever got is the one I'm zeroed in on, just because of all these things that I found out.
Right.
But I was frustrated because nobody could get him, and people were afraid to approach him. So certain things couldn't come out that now can come out because he's not a threat to me anymore.
Right.
I feared the guy because of what I heard from other people.
I know. That's why you couldn't come on the program until now. That was one of the things that I would check in with you once in a while, and you'd say, well, I'd like to talk about it, and we're still working on it. And I was like, well, maybe we just got to wait. And then I came across that post that you made on a particular blog where you pointed out that it was complete luck that I saw this comment you made in response to a blog that's written out there from a few years ago regarding Julie's disappearance, in which you stated that Will Parks had died. And I said, oh, really?
You would have heard about it. You would have heard about it eventually because we would have talked again.
Yeah.
We talk every few months, but it would have been, I just didn't think about you when I was sending out information to people.
That's fine. That's fine. So when I saw that, I said, well, I got to call John and see what's up. And that's how you ended up on the program. And it's been as great a conversation as I hoped it would be when I first talked to you way back in 2017. So
thank you. I appreciate what you're doing. See, this is going to get out there. Maybe we'll get another tip.
Let's
Maybe
hope.
Somebody from Tennessee will say, Powell, I remember that guy.
Yeah.
But,
Well, we have listeners in Idaho. We have listeners in Washington, no doubt about it. I mean, we've covered disappearances in both states. So, in fact, at least 3 in Idaho. So, we have listeners up there. Yep. So, you never know. Maybe somebody else knew Will Parks, or, we'll just have to see.
Yep.
Okay.
There's other things we're following up on right now that I can't tell you about, but there's a lot of, we're just, every day something new happens.
Yeah.
And we're just going to stay with it. The key will be finding bodies.
Yeah.
Or finding someone that says this person told me they did it, and they used a club with a 6-inch hatchet on it. And of course, I'm just making this up.
Yeah.
And it matches the evidence that hasn't been released. They either have got to find the bodies or find irrefutable evidence in a deathbed confession or get a conviction.
Yeah.
That's how you can clear a case. It's not going to clear until then. It may never clear, but I consider it solved. I'm not looking for another suspect. I'm just continuing.
Well, if it makes you feel any better, John, Disappearance that I covered very early on in Unfound's existence, way back in 2016, of a disappearance of a girl. Her name was Andrea Bowman from Hamilton, Michigan. She disappeared in 1989, and just this past week, her adopted father was charged with her murder, and they found the body on the grounds where they lived. So, 31-year-old disappearance.
Well,
so it's happening all the time. So.
I know it does. Elizabeth Smart, J.C. Duger, was found alive 25 years after being abducted. The one in California.
Yeah.
She was found alive with 2 little kids, and she's got a very happy life now, back with her mom.
So these things happen.
It does happen.
Yeah, it does happen.
There's only 5 cases where girls who have been missing a long, long time have been found alive. Elizabeth Smart, J.C. Duger, the case on, she was on a milk cart, and the 3 gals that were rescued in Chicago a few years ago.
That was in Cleveland.
That's the only 5 I know
think that
of.
was in Cleveland.
Pardon me?
Cleveland.
Oh, Cleveland. Yeah, wherever it was. It was back east.
Yeah.
And those are the only 5 I know about where a girl has been missing for many, many years and found alive.
Yeah. There's probably a few more, but those are certainly one of the more well-known ones, sure. John, I deeply appreciate you being on this episode of Unfound. It's finally great to interview you for the program. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, good work, Ed. Keep it up.
I appreciate
that. I hope you succeed, and I hope you get to do this full time.
I do this full time. There's no doubt about that. But we have a lot of very lofty goals for Unfound in addition to the podcast. So I know what you mean. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
And that was my interview with John Polos, friend and former co-worker of Julie Weflin. I thank John for finally appearing on the program. I hope you found what he had to say as interesting as I did. If any of you are wondering what a good grassroots investigation looks and sounds like, what John Polos has done over the last 10 years is the perfect example. No confrontations, no harassment, no illegalities. That, coupled with documentation, going where the facts took him, and really thinking about what information he was collecting. I cannot compliment him enough. Seriously, if you were thinking about investigating a disappearance, I want you to replay this interview over and over and over. It's a great way to educate yourself. Now to my summation, and I'm going to take on each of these disappearances one at a time. I'll be pointing out reasons to and reasons not to suspect Will Parks in these cases. First, Julie Weflin. Why is Will Parks a good suspect? Number 1, he knew Julie. Number 2, she allegedly got him kicked out of the nature club. Number 3, he lived only a few miles from where she was attacked. Number 4, Julie was on a road he would have used to get to his house. Why is Will Parks not a good suspect? Number 1, because it means Will Parks seemingly just happened to coincidentally run across a woman who had ticked him off months before. Number 2, despite a majority of the neighbors pointing the finger at Will Parks, their answers could have been tainted if they knew Will Parks had a run-in with the police back in 1999. Number 3, despite eyewitnesses saying they saw a man matching Will Parks' description that day, the information they provided did not lead anywhere, maybe due to the fact that eyewitness testimony is not regarded as being very reliable. Next, Deborah Swanson. Why is Will Parks a good suspect? Number 1, at least 4 people saw Will at the same party that Deborah attended the day before she disappeared. Number 2, Deborah's sister says Deborah knew Will Parks
and had problems with him. Number 3, the park was searched, no remains of Deborah were found. Number 4, the park where she disappeared sits next to a body of water. Her body never washed ashore, reducing the chance that she might have committed suicide. Why is Will Parks not a good suspect in the disappearance of Deborah Swanson? Number 1, no one saw him near the park that day. Number 2, of course, no one saw him or anyone else carrying a body out of the park that day. Number 3, Will didn't live near the park at that time. Number 4, there is no proof Will was stalking Deborah to know where she would have been that day. Now, Kathryn Gregory. Why is Will Parks a good suspect in her disappearance? Number 1, he lived in the general area of where Kathryn disappeared. Number 2, if Will killed Deborah and Julie, Kathryn fits in the same demographic that they do. Why isn't Will Parks a good suspect in Kathryn's disappearance? Number 1, unlike Deborah and Julie, there is seemingly no social circle connection between Will and Kathryn. Number 2, Kathryn's disappearance sounds to me like her husband could have had something to do with it, more than anybody else. Overall, for these 3 disappearances, 2 points bother me in the attempt to connect them. Number 1, we just have too many people claiming to have seen things and known things too long after the times of all 3 disappearances. Where were these people in 1981, 1986, 1987? For example, the guy who came forward recently, who said he saw Julie arguing with someone. Did he really not know she disappeared until the past few months? Really? The other point that bothers me is all 3 are very much different scenarios. One woman was at work, Julie. One woman was going for a run, Deborah. One was coming out of a class or going to work, Kathryn. Not to mention, all 3 are professional women. All disappeared during daylight hours. Really, all those points should have made these women the least likely to disappear just by themselves. But somehow, Will Parks, if we are to believe it, managed to pull off all 3 abductions and get away with them for over 30 years. What I'm saying is there is a reason professional women don't get kidnapped during daylight hours. Why? Because they are the toughest target in the toughest environment. By contrast, prostitutes at night, the easiest. Yet somehow, Will Parks allegedly accomplished a very difficult task 3 times. Believing that 3 individual men pulled off the disappearances is much easier to imagine. I think what I'm saying is, despite all the great work that John has done so far, and I know he's going to continue to work on all of these disappearances, there's still a lot of wiggle room to believe Will Parks is responsible for any of these disappearances. He is surely not a bad choice, and I can understand why he has gotten John's attention, but if it were me, these would be the next steps I would take to reduce that wiggle room. Somebody in Kathryn Gregory's family must be talked to, including her husband at the time. The club where Will and Julie and seemingly Deborah were members, that club president needs to be talked to in a way that he or she understands, since its leadership so far has been reluctant to help. The tough part, it very well may be the president wasn't even alive when these disappearances happened. I would go to the park where Deborah disappeared and really try to understand how someone could have been abducted without anyone seeing. I would track down people who called Will Parks a friend over the last 30 years to see what they have to say. Maybe they could point out women who were in Will's life before he got married in the 2000s. Because I think the women who were in and out of Will's life will be the key to making him a better suspect. All these suggestions are in addition to the obvious ones: getting on Will's land, going through his possessions, and seeing if you really can be connected to Julie, Deborah, and Kathryn's disappearances. All this being done legally, of course. What I'm saying is, until more information can be collected, I don't think we can totally accept or reject Will Parks's involvement in any of these women's disappearances. I'll leave the rest of the theorizing up to you. And that's the program. If you found it informative, please go to the app that you use to listen to Unfound and give this podcast a nice review. I thank you for listening. I'm Ed Dentzel, and you've been listening to Unfound.